So hey guys, welcome back to my channel. What if Naruto had Kaguya as his slave and went to high school DxD? Movie 1. It all went so wrong. It went wrong the moment that the Uchiha brat had to get himself killed. That brat had to be too cocky at the wrong moment to charge head on at Kaguya. Naruto, the knucklehead as always, tried to hold him back, but it was too late. A smirk on the rabbit goddess' lips was the only sign of the coming danger before a bone of ash pierced through his chest. Kurama, the nine-tailed fox, the greatest of Biju and the unofficial firstborn son of Hagoromo Otsutsuki, knew it happened. His chakra was split between the bodies of Kaguya and Naruto, and he saw it from both perspectives. The Uchiha was by all rights dead, and with that victory over Kaguya diminished. Even so, Naruto did not stop hoping for the life of his friend and caught Sasuke in his arms. It was that moment for the first time Kurama saw an Uchiha do some fucking good for once. In Sasuke's last breath, he gave his half of Hagoromo's chakra to him. Not only did the crescent moon mark appear on Naruto's left palm, the Rinne Sharingan replaced his left eye. Determined to honor his friend's sacrifice, the battle began anew with the rabbit goddess. The fight between the pair lasted days on end, and through several dimensions Kaguya summoned them too. Kurama knew this was a losing battle of attrition, yet his host endured to win against Kaguya. It was taking a toll on his part and the Biju with him to constantly sustain his power. Rasengans and tailed beast bombs were thrown out like some bargain sale to dwindle down Kaguya. Earth-shattering punches to crumble mountains crashed down on the rabbit goddess to make her body crumble. Back and forth they went, but neither was ready to yield. Their ideals, as hard it was to admit, were the same: the salvation of the world. Kaguya made that distinction clear when she spoke again at the Ashura incarnate. "Can you not see it, Ashura?" Kaguya shouted from the air, imposing as usual. "I alone know how to save the world." "And you think that taking away people's freedom is the answer?" argued Naruto. "That's the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard. There are other ways to going about saving the world." "It is the only way," Kaguya persisted, multiple truth-seeking orbs appearing at her side. "When you humans were given chakra by my son, he hoped that it would bring peace." "Peace, that naive boy. Look at the peace you've wrought upon yourselves betraying Hagoromo's ideals to use chakra for war. There was never so much bloodshed before you were given chakra, and that is why I must take it back." The orbs of dense chakra fired down upon Naruto. He became a golden flash weaving through the storm, knowing that just one of them can punch a hole through him. In return, Naruto manipulated his own orbs to fire back at Kaguya. Expectantly, she dodged out of the way, but they stopped behind her and reformed into sharp lances. Her Byakugan revealed to her the orbs' approach and swerved out of the way. One that passed her shoulders suddenly bursted into smoke, revealing it to be Naruto, who had used a transformation jutsu. She could not stop the painful kick to her face. Now that might not have done much, but it did make Naruto feel real good punching the hag. "People make mistakes," Naruto exclaimed, bringing an orb to his hand to form a staff. "Sometimes, we just can't stop making them, but we always learn from them and better ourselves. That's just how we do." "And that is where you are wrong," Kaguya roared, sending Naruto careening down with a wordless Shinrei Tensei. "Do you want to know what humanity is? It's a contradiction and at worst, a hypocrisy." More truth-seeking orbs fired down from the sky upon Naruto with greater volume than the last. She added a Shinrei Tensei in the mix to keep Naruto in the ground longer. When the orbs came down, they changed shape and instead clamped down on Naruto's limbs to pin him to the ground. "That is why," Kaguya continued her heated rant, sending more orbs to trap Naruto down, "humans will never find peace. Their individual ideas will always clash with each other, always stuck in their own little worlds. The peace you and Hagoromo want is the salvation of all, but salvation and peace are different things altogether. Your wish for salvation of the world will always lead to more and more killing because one's dream is another's nightmare. Chakra has only made it worse. Just look at the world as it is as a result from your blind arrogance. You shinobi who flaunt it for your villages are no different than murderers. If that isn't hypocrisy, then what is? If you can't accept that, then die." Kaguya spat, sending a rod to impale Naruto's side. "Be crushed in Hagoromo's ideals. Burnt out knowing there was never any hope to achieve them. If you die, my son's mistake will turn to dust and I will lead the world to the true salvation it needs." This I swear. While Naruto stubbornly ignored every word Kaguya said, Kurama was a different story. Her words on the misuse of chakra hit pretty close to home. His eyes flashed back to memories, watching as his father's ideas for chakra were twisted into detergents of war. On some level, Kaguya was right. In the end, humans used chakra for their own selfishness instead of the greater good Hagoromo wanted them to. But Naruto was different. Different from the rest of them. Kurama knew ever since being sealed in the child that he was nothing like the trash that flaunted the sage's gift. It was just unfortunate that were too few humans like the kid. The Biju's thoughts were interrupted by a dry chuckle from Naruto. His hand broke free of his restraints and pulled out the rod that impaled him. The golden chakra instantly healed the wound, but he was going to run on fumes soon. You're not wrong, but you're not right either, Naruto said softly, but Kaguya could hear the Ashura incarnate clearly. Don't you think it's a beautiful thing? Everyone understanding each other and to work for everyone's happiness. I know it is, Dadbeo. Sure, the world is full selfish assholes, but when are we not selfish? That's being human right there, Dadbeo, but you would be surprised how good it can be. That's why I am not giving up on it. Surprising both Kurama and Kaguya, Naruto pushed his chakra to the limit to make a beeline for the rabbit goddess. He managed to make it right in front of her face before she made a reaction. He should have dodged it perfectly, but against all logic he simply stayed his direction and let himself get impaled by an ash bone. As the body of Naruto Uzumaki slowly turned to ash, his smile only widened. I am not giving up, even if it costs me my life, Naruto proclaimed, his hand suddenly punching a hole into Kaguya's chest to her shock. And if I am going down, I am taking you with me. Wonder what will happen if we both die. Will the chakra in the nations dispel? I can live with that actually. As long as the people trapped in that freaky genjutsu are free, I don't care. Kid, what the fuck are you doing? Kurama shouted, sensing that Naruto was sending dangerous amounts of chakra through his system to the point of exploding. And more thing, Naruto added as the golden chakra around him intensified to the point that part of his body were disintegrating. Ever heard of the exploding clone? I always wondered what would happen if a real person made themselves explode. Let's find out. Kaguya's eyes widened in shock. You fucky, that was all that Kaguya was able to let out before Naruto literally exploded. Golden chakra of such immeasurable amounts were unleashed throughout the summoned pocket dimension. So much so that the world was actually destroyed in the ensuing explosion, leaving nothing in its trace. Unknown. What the? Where am I? Kurama muttered as he blinked to consciousness. In all honesty, Kurama fully expected to be dead by all rights in Naruto's suicide attempt on the rabbit goddess. Yet, here he awoke the very next moment in what can only be described as an eternal white expanse. The very same dimension the Biju used to communicate to Naruto. So it was not much of a surprise to find some of his own siblings here. Matabi was the most notable to Kurama, with a body of blue flames and heterochromatic eyes and twin tails swishing behind her. Far off was the youngest sibling, Shukaku, the one-tailed Tanuki, and the sibling that Kurama had the most tension with. Then there was the four-tailed monkey, Son Goku. The odd thing, however, was it was the four of them. None of their other brothers or sisters were here with them, and when they tried reaching out their conscious to contact them, they felt nothing. As though their siblings' very existence was gone. What is going on here? Screamed Shukaku. Where that Naruto boy at? And the bitch Kaguya? And why am I here with you, Kurama Teme? Kurama growled. Look, I don't like this either, but this is a much bigger problem. Something has gone wrong, and there has to be a reason why only us four are only here. This is indeed troubling, my brothers. Matabi added. This is not right. Did we lose? And I second with Shukaku on one front. Son Goku said, banging his knuckles on the ground, creating a ripple through the white expanse. Where is that Naruto of yours, Kurama? Last I remember, before going into the ghetto statue, he made a promise to free us. But you're here and he's not, so where is he? Kurama tried to answer, but whatever words he needed to say refused to leave his throat. The giant fox's crimson eyes lost their projected malice in them when he recalled the last moments of Naruto Uzumaki. Why did it have to come to that? That idiotic, brave kid in the end decided to make himself explode with chakra and taking Kaguya with him. That there was the problem of it all. All of the world's chakra came from her, but unlike Hagoromo sealing away the goddess, Naruto killed her. The most definite possibly of the death of Kaguya is the elemental nations losing their chakra, thereby removing the infinite Tsukuyomi but leaving the people powerless. The Biju themselves should have diminished as they were beings made of chakra, yet their consciousnesses were here instead in their shared mindscape. Like hell, I am going back on my promise, Dadbeo. The Biju's eyes snapped towards the center where they found the very human on their minds. Naruto Uzumaki stood in the center of all them, unfazed by the imposing Biju that surrounded him. His golden chakra cloak was gone to reveal his usual orange and black jacket. However, Naruto's body was surrounded in an ethereal glow and he looked to be fading away at the moment. Floating beside Naruto in Seiza was Kurama's father, Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the sage of 6 paths and progenitor of the way of Ninshu. Wrinkles littered a tired face of chalky pale skin, yet the cheeks did not sag down. Spiky white hair grew down the length of his neck tied in a tail. Hagoromo wore his signature white cloak with the wrists and neckline decorated in 9 tomos. His eyes showed the Rinnegan in all of its power with a gaze that spoke of a man of wisdom far beyond any mortal. Naruto. What's going on? Son Goku spoke. Did we win? Naruto smiled solemnly. Yeah, we did, but not the way we wanted. Kaguya is dead. Hagoromo revealed. And with her death, chakra cannot exist in the elemental nations. But if chakra can no longer exist, that means that we should be gone, Matabi said. Not quite. Hagoromo clarified. At the last moment, Naruto and I pulled your being to be here in this mindscape so we may talk here to say some last words. Last words? Shukaku said in worry. Old man, don't tell me we're not gonna see y'all again. I mean, we just got back together. As to confirm Shukaku's fears, Hagoromo's skin began to crack like dry earth and was beginning to chip off starting with his cheek and shoulders. Kurama felt his heartstrings being pulled harshly seeing the phenomenon before his eyes. The first time Hagoromo died, it was more that his spirit could not exist in the mortal realm. His spirit was everywhere watching everything in the lands of the elemental countries. This time, Kurama could sense Hagoromo's very soul and presence slipping away. A true death had come for the old man, and the only one who he looked up to as a father. Kurama's eyes snapped to Naruto, and any rage that he held in immense proportions was drowned out in depression. The very same was happening to Naruto as his very being was slowly chipping away. This human that had the guts to defy everything in his path, to push through all obstacles with sheer willpower, and a fire of spirit that managed to get to him. The only human Kurama considered too late to be a true friend was dying right before his eyes, yet he still had a smile plastered on his face. You didn't. Kurama muttered. We have decided to take your place instead, Hagoromo announced. No, you can't be serious, cried Son Goku, smashing down his fists. Father, there has to be another way, Matabi protested. No, Hagoromo bellowed, his Rinnegan eyes sternly glancing at the gathered Biju. Kurama, Matabi, Son Goku, and Shukaku. My dear children. You have already suffered enough pain in these long eons on this land. I did not wish that kind of life for any of you. I have failed you as a father once, but I will not do so again. Dad, whimpered Shukaku, openly crying as tears traveled down his sand body. Kit, Kurama said, eyeing the blonde, are you seriously doing this? After all we've been through? Without even thinking on it, Naruto proudly proclaimed. As long as you get to live happily, it's all worth it. You're my friend, and I'll do everything for my friends. You, Kurama let out in a soft rumble, but he couldn't get the words out as sadness unending was taking its hold on him. You selfless idiot. If you two are dying in our place, then where is everyone else? Son Goku asked, perplexed at how the rest of their siblings weren't present. It was jointed decision on their part to give their lives as well for yours. Hagoromo said solemnly, his expression mirroring the toll of old age. This is the result. Hagoromo held out his left hand and immense amounts of chakra condensed into a head-sized orb. It was denser than even a tailed beast bomb, yet unlike the pitch-black darkness the orb of chakra was a beautiful blend of colors of the entire spectrum. The 4 Biju eyed the orb warily because they recognized the chakra as the combination of their 5 other siblings. They sacrificed their consciousness and soul to bring their chakra together. Hagoromo explained as the orb in his palm split into 4 parts. It is their last gift to you four who they have chosen to live instead of them. The orb that was now split into four soared towards the Biju, one for each, sinking through their chests. They each felt a wash of power as the shared portion of their siblings' chakra was added to their own. For some, they felt their chakra reserves multiply from the amount, but the euphoria of added power did not quell the sadness at the loss of the siblings they took for granted. Kurama was especially silent. Remembering the years shortly after Hagoromo's death, he was particularly cold and violent towards the other Biju. Now he was regretting ever doing such a thing. Perhaps he could have had them stay together and they could have protected each other from the humans that wanted to turn them into weapons. Then this whole farce would never have happened. Kurama hated this. He hated this more than Madara and the greed of humanity. Behind all the bitterness built up from eons among the humans was a fear he hid ever since the death of his father from this world. Above all else, Kurama hated his precious people dying before him without him being able to stop it, try as he might. "What is left for us, To-san?" Son Goku said, the first to compose himself, though his tone was hollow. "More or less, we are tossing you guys across whole dimensions," Naruto explained simply. "You'll never have to see this place ever again. To be honest, Gigi and I have no idea where you guys will end up, much less what body you will be in, but it's your best chance at a life without people gunning after you." "Are you serious?" Son Goku said incredulously. "This has a lot of risk to this, even to my standards." "I will repeat what Naruto-san has said, this is your best chance I am giving to you," Hagoromo answered. "We can at least guarantee that all of you will be reincarnated in the same world, and that your chakra will always attract one another so you will never lose each other again." Hagoromo paused and the Biju looked at the pair below them in morbid horror as Naruto's and the sage's deterioration accelerated. In a matter of seconds one of their arms was already chipped away into nothingness. Their remaining arms were currently disintegrating away as well as the lower half of their body. "It would seem our time is up," Hagoromo said, Rinnegan eyes bearing regret towards the four Biju. "My dear children, forgive this old man for his foolishness. I never imagined any of you would go through such cruelty at their hands. So please hear these final words from me. Live free, prosperous, and most importantly happy." His piece said, the rest of his body chipped away. All the four Biju could do was watch with tears in their eyes as Hagoromo Otsutsuki, the sage of six paths, the creator of the way of Ninshu, and their father, truly die with a contented smile on his face. Matabi, Son Goku, and Shukaku went into alarm as they felt their bodies being pulled back and suddenly vanish in a flash of white light. Only Kurama and Naruto were left alone in the white expanse that was also chipping away like the latter. The giant, nine-tailed fox's lips were trying to snarl in outrage at his partner's blunder, but it formed to a quivering sad frown. His eyes, once flashing red with untold rage, were now dimmed with pitiful sorrow. "Hey Kurama," Naruto called out, "can you make me a promise?" Kurama could only respond in a nod. "Wherever you find yourself in," Naruto said, his blue eyes shimmering, "promise me you'll make some precious people for you to cherish and protect them with your life." "I will," Kurama said. "Till then," Naruto said, waving at the Biju as only his neck was left. "See you in the next life." "No," Kurama shouted, digging his claws into the ground as he felt some odd force pulling him back and contorting his body. "Not yet. There's still so much I have to make up for, Naruto. Naruto." The world of Kurama, nine-tailed fox and the greatest of the Biju, went suddenly dark. His last memories were only seeing Naruto's body fading away, smiling all the way up to the end. For a split second, Kurama thought he saw a whole army of the many people Naruto bonded with saying their farewells. Outskirts of Kyoto. 4 years later, "Ken, why are you doing this?" spoke the pained voice of a man lying on a floor holding his stomach that was bleeding a pool of red on the floor. "I knew you should never have gone with those devils." The man was a handsome item at a height of 510. He was wearing a black yukata with blue jagged designs and a red obi. His skin was a healthy tan to be a few shades darker than usual white skin. His face was structured with a stout jaw, and his cheeks featured 3 whisker marks each. Most strangely on the man were the red fox ears and 4 tails he had as traits of a kitsune. His red eyes were hatefully glaring at the man at the door of his home. He was awfully tall at 64 with unnaturally dark skin, red eyes, pointed ears, and a sinister smile to reveal sharp fangs. In another life, the kitsune knew the man as a friend long ago, and never did he have such a hideous look. This transformation was possible from demonic energy when the human was reincarnated as a devil into a peerage of a high-class devil. The former human was only chosen because of his possession of the demonic blade, Muramasa. It was the final piece of war art forged by Muramasa himself, famed for the demonic power of his swords. The one in Ken's hands was the ultimate among them, as it was told that Muramasa gathered all of the blades he ever forged, tossed them into the fires to be melted down, and then having himself jump into the fires, and the finishing touches went to his only apprentice. It was a mighty blade capable of rivaling famous holy swords. The same blade that was being held at the neck of the kitsune's wife. A buxom woman of scarlet locks and hazel eyes with her own pair of fox ears and 4 swishing tails. Her form was bloodied from slashes made from Muramasa, and the male kitsune knew that she would die from the demonic energy poisoning her. Ken had come here after many years. By betraying, he and his fellow peerage masters killed their master for their own pleasure. The result of killing their king was quite gruesome on the devil's appearance, but it didn't seem Ken cared. "Why?" spoke Ken. "Well, at first it was to take back Sarah here when you took her from me. I always wanted to ravage this body for myself, but now I think I can do better and just kill you." Right before the kitsune's eyes, Muramasa slashed open Sarah's throat. Her eyes dilated to an expression of horror, staring back at her mate, who looked as though his whole world shattered. She mouthed her last words, and she was dropped dead to the floor. "Bastard!" roared the male kitsune, but Ken had put a foot on his chest to pin him down. "Pipe down!" Ken spat, angling his blade down. "You'll spoil my fun." "To-san." The male kitsune's went cold when he heard the soft voice. He managed to strain his neck around to find a boy only 4 years of age. His child. The little kitsune was a mirror image of his father, but with a much more structured jawline hidden away by baby fat, deep crimson eyes with a black pupil, and fox ears and 4 tails that were crimson-orange color. Those same red eyes glistened with tears as he saw the scene before him, with his mother murdered and his father soon to follow. A son? Ken wondered. "Run!" The male kitsune. That was his last word before the demonic blade sank into his skull. The child kitsune could only stare in morbid horror of his entire family killed right in front of him. His heart drummed in his ears, his head felt like it was going to split, and he began to hyperventilate. So many horrid emotions of sadness was too much trauma for the child. The mind completely destroyed itself, leaving only an empty shell as the persona that was the child ceased to be. Only for a powerful incarnate to awaken. Kurama, the 9-tailed fox and first son of Hagoromo, awoke into his new body, but to him the 4 years was an instant. His own trauma of watching Naruto die was still fresh to him, threatening to unleash in rage to sat the emptiness in his heart. His own sorrow mixed with the traumatic memories of the child that was supposedly his reincarnation caused a rather violent reaction. Kurama gave a mighty wail as a child, and tremendous amounts of energy came off him in floods of red. The whole house was obliterated in an instant, and miles upon miles of bamboo forest were corroding from the potent chakra of the Biju-made yokai. Ken and his crew that were stationed outside found themselves pinned to the ground by a sudden pressure weighing the literal weight of mountains. It came as a shock to the stray devil that this energy was in fact chakra, but the likes he had never seen, and with such intense malice. His balance was almost compromised when Muramasa soared out his grip. He barely managed to look forward in shock to see the black hilt of yellow diamond decorations gripped in Kurama's right hand. They both made eye contact, and Ken felt inexplicable fear rush through him from those crimson eyes. He watched as the pupil and the sclera shifted to make the whole eye red, featuring 3 rings with 9 tomo. And that wasn't all when Ken watched something shift among the 4 crimson tails flailing above the boy. There was a further increase in chakra, reaching low ultimate class as a 4 tails became 5. Then 5 became 6. 6 became 7. 7 became 8. And finally, 9 fully grown crimson-orange tails flailed wildly from the kitsune, yet his chakra kept on rising. This chakra, thought Ken in shock as he was starting to lose consciousness. This is far beyond than even a 9-tailed kitsune can have. See, could this be Mao class? No, it went far beyond Mao class. The chakra kept on growing more and more in amount, as though a great flood had taken over the land. Clouds had gathered above from the sheer amount to become a flash hurricane. In the heavens of Japan, the Shinto pantheon went deadly silent as they felt the incredible chakra that went beyond their own powers. From the depths of hell, the Crimson Lucifer suddenly paused in motion as he felt an incredible and destructive power wash over the world and felt his own power seem to thrum in excitement to face whatever it is. At Kyoto, a blue-haired, heterochromatic Nekosho and a sand-haired Tanuki glanced in the direction of the massive chakra. In mountains far in the mainland known as Asia, a red-haired youth opened his eyes from his meditation and cracked a wry smile. All three of these individuals had one common thought. Took you long enough, Kurama-ni-san. Back with Kurama, he no longer had any conscious thought, only mindless rage that he needed to vent. The Rinne Sharingan gifted to him from his late father glared upon the quivering stray devil. You, Rao. The last Ken saw was the kitsune child forming black orb from his mouth and everything went black. From afar, a miniature mushroom cloud split the sky. And in one part of Kyoto, in the Grand Palace, a certain blonde with golden eyes of 4 years old wearing a yellow yukata and having a pair of golden fox ears and 9 tails peered to the distance. When she saw the cloud, the girl could feel the raw chakra that produced it. Mostly she felt scared, but a more primal side of the kitsune yokai felt rather excited. The question was, who could it be? The answer would literally change her life for the centuries to come. A flash of light signaled the arrival of a woman at the site of the enormous chakra that shook the world. She was a tall woman with a waterfall of black hair sweeping down her back, pale skin with a rich pink tint, and eyes that seemed to blaze like the sun. Around her form and beautiful body of wide hips and F-cup chest, the woman wore a black yukata with golden embroidery of the sun. Her name was Amaterasu, the Shinto goddess of the universe and the sun. Her beauty unrivaled in the heavens of the moonlit world and one of the only kind gods towards humanity. She was fortunate to arrive at the source of the chakra that went above her own power, and no doubt such a power attracted everyone in the moonlit world. It was her utmost duty to drop whatever she was doing to get here as soon as possible before some unsightly parties took advantage of this. This was the territory of the Shinto faction, and this immediately became a concern for her faction only. The sun goddess will damn any foreign power usurping her rule. Especially that dirty, two-timing, stinky crow, piece of shit Azazel. Amaterasu was not prepared for the destruction that lay before the goddess. The chakra in the air was so potent that miles of bamboo forest were corroded into nothingness. It was almost similar to the power of destruction of Seer's ex-Lucifer. In the center of it all was the remains of a familiar home. The goddess rushed to the remains only to snap her hand to her mouth to stop sobs escaping from her when she saw the dead bodies of the Kitsune family. Tora and Sarah. She knew these two well ever since they were children. Amaterasu was responsible for raising them as a responsibility to protect the Kitsune clan and had grown to see them as her own children, much like Yusaka. The goddess was there for every step in their life, remembering their laughter when they played in bamboo forests, the day she wed them together, and the day they gave birth to their only son. But to see them butchered right there lifeless broke her heart. It wasn't too long until she found the culprit to be a deceased devil. Wrath filled her broken heart. This was a crime she could not stand. The Devil's Civil War may have been over almost 1,000 years ago, but that stopped this filthy spawn from encroaching on Shinto territory and harassing her people. After this, Amaterasu will make sure no such alliance can happen between them if this is the result of cooperation. Once she brings this up to the new Mao, any alliance was officially over. A whimper broke her rage-induced trance to find a shivering bundle of crimson-orange fur. Upon closer examination, Amaterasu gasped in relief at the familiar face of the son of the beloved Kitsune poking out. Tears flew from her eyes as the goddess rushed to the small kit's side and checked him over. Nothing was injured and the only ailment was the child suffered from chakra exhaustion. It was relieved to see that little Kurama was still alive after all this mess, but it was pain to see him crying in his sleep. He obviously saw the murder before his loss of consciousness. As Amaterasu was running her hands over the kit's tails, she noticed an oddity as though she felt there were more than 4. Glancing to the back, Amaterasu was left speechless at adding 5 new tails to make 9. It didn't make sense to the goddess as Kurama's parents were both Kitsune with only 4 tails and she had seen his birth herself. Yet, here he was with a myriad of 9 crimson-orange tails that felt warm to the touch, much like her precious Yusaka. Then Amaterasu thought back to the explosion of chakra that she was originally attracted to, and the conclusion left her in stunned silence. As ridiculous as it seemed, Kurama was the source of that very potent chakra. A kitsune with 9 tails would normally be ranked as high ultimate class, but the levels that were felt around the whole world were a match to the super devils themselves. If that was the case, then Kurama had just made himself a bigger target in the moonlit world. You are very special, Kurama, thought Amaterasu as she picked up the sleeping yokai into her arms with the Muramasa blade that was clutched tightly in his hands. I just know that you are going to change the world around you. That power of yours speaks for itself, but I won't leave you alone. At the very least, I will give you a new home, and I will raise you as our champion and as my son. Amaterasu could see great things for Kurama. There was so much potential in him that it was unfathomable that he will become something greater than herself, and she will make sure Kurama is raised the right way, full of love and kindness. Besides, Yasaka could use a new playmate. A giggle escaped the goddess' lips, imagining her surrogate daughter's reaction to Kurama's own 9 tails. Royal Palace, Ka-chan, cried a blonde girl running towards Amaterasu. Said Shinto goddess turned around and a warm smile graced her face as she saw her cute Yasaka. The kitsune girl was 4 years old, wearing royal robes as golden as the sun and golden orange eyes to match Amaterasu's. Her face was set in a perfect heart shape that made it almost impossible to not pinch the yokai's cheeks. From her head of sun-kissed blonde hair poked out a pair of fox ears, and behind her swished 9 golden tails. Amaterasu kneeled down and opened her arms wide for Yasaka to jump into for a hug. The pair of yokai and goddess giggled as they briefly spun around. This feeling of cherishing children who loved her back made it so much worth it for Amaterasu. It has been the only driving force for the Shinto goddess that has kept her active for these eons. Did my little sunshine behave while I was gone? Amaterasu said as she set the yokai child down. Yasaka nodded. Yes, Ka-chan. If you're here, does that mean you're finished in the heavens? Amaterasu's smile strained. That's difficult to explain. You see, I've brought someone here. Do you remember Tora and Sarah? Yeah, they are one of my favorite people, and Sarah's really kind to me. Yasaka chirped. Are they here, Ka-chan? No, sunshine, Amaterasu admitted with a sad frown. Something bad has happened. Tora and Sarah won't be seen again, I am afraid. It pained Amaterasu's heart when Yasaka's smile dimmed upon hearing that. Why not? They're gone, Amaterasu said. But there is still someone here still with us. He's sleeping for the moment. Can I see him? Yasaka asked. Of course, Amaterasu said after a long pause thinking about it. But please don't disturb him. He really needs his rest. Can you promise me that? Yes, Ka-chan. Yasaka answered. With a warm smile on her face, Amaterasu held Yasaka's little hand and escorted her through the halls of the royal palace. The goddess repressed a sigh, knowing that in a few years' time she would have to curb her time with Yasaka to make way for the kitsune's teachings to become the new leader of Kyoto and her personal priestess via her connection to the local ley lines. She always hated leaving her children like that, but it was part of the natural cycle of life. That didn't mean Amaterasu was not going to cherish every single moment she could with Yasaka. They soon came to the medical wing Amaterasu had ordered to be built for the palace for convenience, complete with its own staff of doctors and nurses loyal to Yasaka. Currently, the medical wing served as a small hospital for the servants and officials. The whole side of the grand hall on their left was lined in the shoji that made up the medic wing. Amaterasu found the right pair of doors to go through and simply knocked to get the doctor's attention. No sooner did she knock did a shadow approach the shoji door to slide it open, revealing it to be a tall tengu in a white coat. On sight of the Shinto deity, the tengu went into a low bow. The raven yokai would have stayed that way as long as time if Amaterasu didn't simply wave it off with a strained smile. She knew she was revered and feared among the denizens of the Shinto religion, but there were times Amaterasu wished she was treated normally. Hello, doctor. Amaterasu greeted. How is the kit? I can say the child has a clean build of health. The tengu informed with a smile. I am honestly surprised of his recovery. With the exhaustion on his body, I fully expected the kitsune to be here for the week, but his chakra and body healed in mere hours. I've never seen anything like it before. And you said that he supposedly had 4 tails? Yes. Amaterasu nodded. But as we both have to consider, Kurama is special. Did you get a measure of his chakra reserves, seeing as he is now a 9-tailed kitsune? The tengu struggled in making an answer. Amaterasu-sama. I could only glean so much, but the boy's chakra is completely off the charts and by far the densest I have ever seen in my life. Dare I say, goddess of the sun, his chakra could be stronger than gods themselves. It is as I have feared, Amaterasu muttered. Doctor, you are sworn to never utter a word of what you have discovered today. The Tengu nodded. You have my word or else I condemn myself to the Shinigami. Then please leave for the day, Amaterasu ordered. The Tengu gave one last bow and hurried out of the medical wing. In the entire conversation with the bird yokai, Yasaka had hidden behind the goddess' right leg in anxiety. Her friendly nature only went so far that there were still times the kitsune was nervous around strangers. But, right after the Tengu left, the golden-eyed kitsune sprang from her hiding place, and so abruptly that Amaterasu didn't properly act to stop from running towards the only occupied bed where laid Kurama in a blank sleep with the demonic sword rested on the wall beside him. Amaterasu narrowed her eyes at the abomination. At least in her eyes, that was Muramasa's last creation in this world. At one point in time, the Shinto goddess of the sun looked down on Muramasa with pride in his quest to create a sword to end all wars. She thought of the ancient smith to be one of the only noble humans in the world, but for all of his worth, he was flawed by his naivety. All of his swords that were meant to cut off a natural order of the world were cursed with demonic taint, making any who wielded them no different than rabid animals. Muramasa had realized too late the fault of his weapons and so in his grief gathered every one of his swords he crafted to be melted down and throw himself into the fires. His only apprentice fashioned the resulting metal into a new demonic blade, one so powerful it caused a complication with the church and heaven of the demonic energy it contained. The only saving grace was the fact the blade chose its wielder much as Caliburn once did, as it still held the ideals of peace Muramasa once held. So it came as a shock to Amaterasu when she carried Kurama that his right hand was holding the hilt of the demonic blade tightly. The last she heard, the human is known as Ken was Muramasa's new wielder, but he had already been recruited into a devil's peerage. It didn't take long to connect the dots of exactly who attacked Tora and Sarah, and in the midst of whatever immense chakra Kurama tapped into the blade had chosen him then. As much as she disliked it, Kurama was officially the new wielder of Japan's most powerful demonic sword. Is that him, Ka-chan? Chirped Yasaka, trying to peek above the edge of the bed given her short height. Yes, that is Kurama-kun and the one who will be living with you, Amaterasu answered with a sad smile. Here, let me help you with that. Amaterasu gave Yasaka a stool to stand on to see the boy that her mommy brought home. As soon as she saw Kurama's face, her mind blanked out for a moment and her cheeks gained a bit of a rosy tint to them. Kurama was certainly not one to have average looks even among the yokai race. The baby fat expected of kids gave his face a putty roundness and softness to them like a fluffy marshmallow, but give him a few years to work it out and he would be stunning. His shoulder-length, spiky hair in contrast to Yasaka's sun-kissed blonde locks was a startling shade of crimson orange akin to a roaring fire with fox ears of matching color on top of his head, and his eyebrows and eyelashes seemed to be thick lines of black. Catching most of Yasaka's attention were 6 thick scratch marks, 3 on each cheek, that resembled whiskers. It honestly gave Kurama a cutesy appeal. Yasaka suddenly had the urge to scratch the whiskers. As she slowly reached her fingers out to do so, her eyes snapped to focus on certain appendages poking out the other side of the bed. Specifically being 9 tails crimson orange in color waving lazily. Yasaka's eyes widened in shock at such a thing. For her whole life she was told that she was the last of the 9-tailed kitsunes. She wasn't alone anymore. Ka-chan, Ka-chan, look, exclaimed Yasaka in her excitement. He has the same tails as I do. Amaterasu nodded. I know that, Masumi. That's why I brought him here. Yay! Yasaka cheered. Now I have a new friend. However, a strangled groan cut off the excitement in the air and the two conscious in the room looked back at Kurama. Yasaka's loud cheers had the unfortunate effect of rousing Kurama from his sleep. His face contorted grimly as he was brought back to consciousness. When those orbs of crimson with 3 tomo opened before fading to a normal eye opened, it was Kurama, the Kyuubi no Kitsune and firstborn of Hagoromo Otsutsuki. It was Kurama who had just freshly lost his only dear friend and was sorting through memories of a childhood that wasn't his own. To him, it was only a minute in between the experiences of the heavy trauma he unleashed. Despite such circumstances, Kurama was not expecting when he came back to consciousness to be staring back into the golden eyes of an adorable girl of 4 years of age with sun-kissed blonde hair looking at him curiously. For a moment, Kurama's thought process was blank as he and the girl stared at each other. The former soon regained his composure and silently studied everything in his view in detail, and he was more or less floored by the other physical appearances of the girl. Mainly being the golden fox ears and 9 tails swishing behind her in a hypnotic motion. Never did Kurama realize that he would meet a being that resembled anything close to himself, but such thoughts were cut off when he took note of how different his body was. His shock came tenfold to find himself in a human's body. Lifting up his hands were not the usual crimson limbs but arms of bare skin, tanned as it was. Yet he could still feel that he had his favored 9 tails and fox ears. He could still feel his chakra, but now it felt more internalized, like it didn't completely make up his very body. That was true on some level since Kurama's original body was made of chakra. Thank goodness that he still had his tails though. I don't think I could live with myself as a complete human, thought Kurama. It's nice to see you alive, Kurama-kun, Amaterasu said as she approached the yokai, but frowned at the confusion in his eyes. Do you not remember me? No, Kurama answered honestly. Amaterasu sighed. I suppose you wouldn't after what you've gone through. Kurama closed his eyes as he was hit with memories of the Kurama that grew as a child with loving parents. A child that had by all rights died the moment he saw his family murdered, and that trauma awoke him. The only thing left of that Kurama were the scarce memories, but they gave Kurama a true sense of the love of parents. Which reminded Kurama of the bodies of his parents. They had died to protect them, and some part of him still saw them as his real parents. He needed to go back there to at least give them a proper burial. Well, Kurama-kun, Amaterasu said, you are to now live here with her. Hi, chirped Yusaka, waving her hand. My name is Yusaka. Good grief, this girl gives that pale-eyed stalker a run in cuteness, Kurama thought. Is there anything you need, Kurama-kun? Amaterasu said. Anything? I need to bury my parents, answered Kurama, his voice sullen and void. Where are they? They are still at your home, Amaterasu informed, the light in her sunlit eyes dimming significantly. I am sorry, Kurama-kun. I had to get to safety before everything else, and I was worried about any unwanted parties involved. Do you need me to take you there? No, you've done enough, Kurama replied, accidentally putting a heated edge in his tone. I am so sorry, muttered Amaterasu, the life in her voice seemingly devoid as she left the medical wing. Let's go, Yusaka. He just needs some more time. Okay, Yusaka said, a bit downtrodden. Can I talk to Kukun again? The Shinto goddess would have giggled at the cute nickname if she weren't so distraught by Kurama's emotional state. Of course, you may try, Amaterasu answered, but her tone was delivered flatly than usual. Kurama did not linger his eyes away from their stare to the sheets. The woman was not wrong that he needed some time to himself. A lot more time to be exact. No one would understand what he had been through. On the same day in mere minutes, Kurama had to watch as the father he looked up to and his only friend fade away from the living right before his eyes and then assaulted with an alien, yet familiar trauma of watching his reincarnation's family die and thus awaken him. His emotions were out of control. From the sorrow of Naruto's death came unbidden rage, and combined with the trauma of his reincarnation he had no doubt left an explosive impression on the world. All that was left was the Kyuubi no Kitsune of the tailed beasts, yet the Kurama of this world was absorbed into him with the child's own memories, especially the memories of his adoring mother and father. It was the reason to stain the sheets damp as he cried for the 3rd time in his life. An ancient being he may have once been, he was stuck in the body of a child. A child prone to emotions not yet matured in control, and one who has lost everything. So tries as he might to keep a straight face, Kurama could not stop the tears falling from his face. All the while, doubt crept into his soul. Why? Why did the people around him have to die? Kit, what do I do? Kurama thought, holding his face in his hands to somehow stop crying. I am not like you. I can't be like you because how do I move forward when I have lost everything? How would you do it? Why couldn't it be me? Can you make a promise? Make some precious people for you to cherish and protect them with your life. See y'all in the next life. Naruto's last and greatest words echoed in Kurama's head as he curled up with his tails wrapping around him and crying himself to sleep. Elsewhere, Seraphal Leviathan, one of the new Mao of the Devil faction and formerly known as Seraphal Seatree, had a cheery demeanor on her face despite the serious situation. Ever since taking up the position as the new Leviathan and becoming the head of foreign affairs, she worked instantly in making positive connections to other supernatural factions. Ever since the Devil Civil War and the establishment of the evil peace system, the biblical factions have entered into a tense Cold War. It was a necessity as Seraphal herself proposed to open negotiations to other factions. That is why earlier she was in talks with the leading head of the Shinto faction, Amaterasu, the goddess of the sun and universe. It was a delicate matter on many parts, especially considering that the goddess was in fact far stronger than Seraphal, despite the former Seatree herself besting one of the Mao in battle. She simply wasn't in the same league as Searsex and Ajuka, who became the new Lucifer and Beelzebub respectively. The talks themselves were going well until it happened. A massive surge that Seraphal can only describe as the rage of nature itself. Seraphal knew that what she felt was chakra, but never did she imagine such large and potent amounts that rivaled Searsex. It felt for a moment as though the Crimson Lucifer had released his full demonic form. No sooner did the surge of chakra wash probably over the whole world did a small earthquake hit Kyoto with a mushroom cloud visible in the distance. Amaterasu, to Seraphal's surprise, had put the whole meeting on pause to deal with the issue. It was strange, but Seraphal didn't mind. She herself would never make a huge fuss, even with political talks. In fact, it was hard to offend the devil whose dream was to be a magical girl. She had patiently waited in the same room for hours with the servants gracious enough to give her a meal for her hunger and to remind the Leviathan that Japan had one of the best foods in the world. That all ended when the Shinto goddess returned, opening the doors with a bang, absolutely livid. Seraphal froze up at the marching angry goddess from the wrathful power she was unleashing in the whole room, enough to make her skin pale and produce bullets of sweat. Is there something wrong, Amaterasu-san? Seraphal tried not to whimper. What's wrong? Bellowed Amaterasu, the temperature in the room heating up suddenly. What's wrong is that a whole family of kitsune, ones I saw as my own children, have been murdered in their home by you devils. The atmosphere of the whole room instantly took a turn for the worse. Seraphal felt like her lunch was going to go right through her, and she could feel the angry glares of the yokai guards drilling into her skull. If looks could kill, the Mao would have been a pile of smoking ash from the sheer hate. But it can't have been us, panicked Seraphal. We would never try something as horrid as that. We're trying to change our status quo. It must have been the work of a stray devil. Amaterasu was too far in her outrage, and every word Seraphal was spouting was not helping. Her self-control snapped and in one fluid motion gripped the edge of the table in one hand and tossed it into the air, crashing into the left wall, her raw strength reducing it to splinters and ash. That is no excuse for my loved ones that lie dead by your kind's hands, roared Amaterasu, a miniature sun blazing behind the Shinto goddess. Right now, there's a child, no older than 4, who is completely broken and alone by the death of his parents. Whatever alliance you conjure up I can never agree to if my people, my children, have their homes burned and their bodies lying dead on my territory. Seraphal rose from her seat in an almost pleading manner. Please, Amaterasu-sama, you have to. Get out! Screeched Amaterasu. Get away from my children that you people in danger, crawl back to whatever hole you came from and tell your leaders if they can't keep their people in line and endanger my children, then my borders are forever closed to you. Out of fear of incurring any more of Amaterasu's wrath, Seraphal disappeared in a magic circle whilst looking back with tears growing in her eyes. With the center of her wrath gone, the temperature in the room cooled down to normal levels. Amaterasu was left emotionally exhausted and slumped down into one of the still intact chairs that weren't destroyed with the table. Her right hand covered her face to hold back frustrated tears. One of the yokai, an Inu by his white dog ears, approached the sun goddess to somehow give some comfort. My lady, are you all right? Spoke the Inu softly. No, I am not. Muttered Amaterasu bitterly. I want entire borders closed off to outsiders. Have any compounds, including the Necocious, sent a guard detail with daily reports. No devil, fallen, or angel is to come into our homes without my express permission, is that clear? Yes, Amaterasu-sama, The Inu answered with a salute before sprinting off to deliver the orders to the parties that needed to be informed. Amaterasu was only given half a minute to her own thoughts before she felt a new presence catching her attention. The once clear, sunny skies were marred by gray clouds brought on by the coming of another god entity. She didn't have to look to frown about who it was that intruded upon her. "I've never thought I would see the day you become angrier than my storms, sister." Amaterasu spared a cold glance to the source of the voice, revealing it to be a man that was practically the embodiment of war. He wore a robust Chinese armor consisting of gold brace and pauldrons, and he wore a red vest and white pants decorated in golden embroidery of storm clouds. Sheathed on his back was a nodashi equipped with a silver hilt seemingly shining with scales and a golden tsuba studded with rubies. The man had sharp features very similar to Amaterasu with storm golden eyes and spiky black hair that went down his back. This man was one of the most notorious in the world, one who lusted for war despite his calculative and cold exterior. Evident by the fact that the very man in question is the creator of the Five Branch Alliance, an organization bent on finding worthy opponents to fight. She knew him very well because, as much as she despised it, he was family. For he is Susanoo, the Shinto god of storms and war. Where her light of the sun blessed crops, it would be his raging storms that would flood the lands and tarnish her people's lives. While she was empathetic and kind to the humans, Susanoo lacked most if any emotion. It was an endless cycle that occurred in their earliest memories, which is why their relationship on a whole was hated on one side by Amaterasu. "Susanoo." Amaterasu seethed. "What are you doing here?" "You are rather hard to ignore with how much anger you have radiated," Susanoo said, his tone mostly blank with just a hint of mirth. "What I do here is none of your business considering the fact you don't give a damn about anyone." Amaterasu snapped at her twin brother. "So unnaturally cold you are, sister," noted Susanoo with meager interest. "But matters of yourself are beside the point. You are not the real reason I came here." Amaterasu scoffed. "What could you possibly want here?" "Do not play dumb with me, sister," Susanoo said, a flash of lightning followed by thunder from outside. "Where is he?" "I do not know what you are talking about," Amaterasu said. "The one who I felt give off that massive chakra," Susanoo explained, walking closer to the sun goddess. "The better way to say is Woe did not feel that power? No one in our history ever released anything close to the amount of chakra, and I know for a fact it came from someone here." "What do you plan to do with this certain someone?" Amaterasu said, faking ignorance. "Isn't it obvious?" Susanoo said. "I plan to fight him to a worthy death." Yet again, Amaterasu lost control of her wrath. The storm clouds blanketing the sky broke apart as she strengthened her presence and with a flash of her eyes the wall beside Susanoo in a blast of pure sunlight. Susanoo's only reaction to his sister's outburst was the widening of his eyes, which is the most profound reaction anyone could get from him. Then, with speed beyond human and supernatural, Amaterasu was in front of her twin brother with her hand clutched around Susanoo's throat. "You will not touch him," Amaterasu bellowed. "You will never see him, and I will make sure that any bodily harm upon him I will repay with your body carried through all corners of the world, Makai, and Takamagahara. That is my plan." Susanoo could only stare at the eyes of his twin sister of the sun in pure surprise. Never in their eternal rivalry did Amaterasu physically retaliate, much less for any other occasion. A whole minute passed in their staring contest before it was broken by the crack of a smile on Susanoo's face. Amaterasu's surprise at the sight loosened her grip, allowing the storm god to hold the limb on his throat away. "Where has this side of you been hiding, Amaterasu-ne-san?" Susanoo asked. "It certainly would have kept the many millennia of our existence more interesting." "Well, have it your way then," Susanoo continued, walking away from her sister as she glared at the storm god. "But do remember this. You may be loved by your people, but I still hold sway here. After all, someone has to find a suitable husband for your Yusaka when she comes of age. For the sake of the Kitsune race, of course." The meaning of Susanoo's words was not missed by Amaterasu, but he had already vanished in a flash of lightning and a clap of thunder. Reigning in the hurricane of emotions, she felt a weight on her shoulders. The future as she knew it was going to be full of hardship, and for all her power there was nothing she could do. Not unless a different player entered in the mix of it all. "What do I do?" thought Kurama for the 100th time. At some point in the day, Kurama was excused from the medical wing with full bill of health. The staff of the palace escorted to his new room assigned by Amaterasu. On the way, Kurama sensed that someone was watching him, and with his acute sense of emotions picked up a high amount of innocent curiosity. He assumed it was from that same girl Kurama first laid eyes on when he woke up with his memories of his old life restored. It still boggled him that this world was so different in a good way that he was farthest thing from the strangest in this world. Especially the fact of humanoids having their own animal features, and the lack of fearful stares now replaced with acceptance was soothing. Kurama did not leave from the room, which was typical Japanese style with paper walls and royal rugs and furniture, even when his body cried for food. However, Kurama's thoughts were nowhere on the present of things, and they always went back to the moment of the disaster. The point where he lost everything that he took for granted. His father, most of his siblings, and his best friend gone in an instant. Also, he and a select few of the remaining tailed beasts could live one without the threat of being sealed. His old self would call himself pathetic for crying so much, but the once mighty Kyuubi no Kitsune of the elemental nations can't bring himself to care about his own pride. It was that same stupid pride that costed so much pain in the first place. Maybe if he had been more friendly to Naruto, maybe if he wasn't so selfish of being sealed away, maybe if he hadn't killed his parents, perhaps at least something significant could have changed. Perhaps Kurama deserved to be called a demon because he certainly is good at ruining people's lives. An alien sensation rushed through Kurama's soul and body, and his attention went back to the sheathed blade that rested on his lap. He didn't know what came over him, but something in Kurama's soul ebbed him on to always have the blade with him. It almost felt alive in his hand, and the Kitsune yokai wasn't naive to not think there was a certain specialty in this blade. The former tailed beast could tell that this blade was more powerful than any he had come across in his long life, perhaps surpassing the craftsmanship of Hagoromo's own artifacts. Somehow, from his own soul, Kurama knew the name of this blade. Muramasa, a blade forged to end war. A blade that was meant to cut a very concept of the world, and that it made so dangerous to cut the laws of the universe. A terrifying ability from the ideals of a man that only wanted peace, but such an act against the world earned it the moniker of a demonic sword. In contrast to its demonic status, it tried to soothe Kurama's mood when he felt down like a grandfather trying to comfort a crying child. Hesitantly, Kurama's hand gripped the hilt of the sword. It wasn't that spectacular on the eyes, with Tsukamaki being made of black wood wrapped by red handle twine, and the Tsuba was a normal black octagon that looked like obsidian but lacked any sort of elaborate design. Clearly, the smith who made the blade focused less on decoration and more on actual makings of a proper weapon. Something Kurama could respect, considering he came from a world where so-called shinobi used highly destructive powers rather than deception and stealth. Kurama pulled out an inch or so of the blade, revealing glimmering steel untouched by the decay of time. The edge was a startling silver, almost white in appearance, while the blunt edge was a dark gray. Any worthwhile wielder of the sword can respect the practical make of the blade in Kurama's hands. Yet this blade chose him for some odd reason he could not fathom as of yet. The Kitsune yokai grimaced as his eyes burned in pain and his vision went back and forth between blurry and clear. This was the second time it happened today, with the first being shortly after he woke up. Kurama choked it up to some sort of phantom pain humans would have, considering he was technically in a humanoid body, but now he was starting to realize the cause was more random. Luckily, Kurama's new room was provided with its own bathroom, so he could check on the problem with his eyes himself. Forcing an eye open, peeking between his fingers clutching his head, the child yokai trudged from his spot on the bed towards the bathroom. It was a much smaller room containing an old-fashioned toilet common of 15th century Japan, a bathtub, and washing station with a mirror provided. First things first, Kurama rushed to the sink, if one could call a magical basin of water that automatically cleaned and refilled, and splashed water in his eyes to relieve himself of the pain. On some level, it did work as the burning sensation faded away, but the blurry vision persisted. Squinting his eyes, Kurama looked at his reflection in the mirror and noticed certain red lines going down his cheeks. When his vision cleared again, he was shocked still what was revealed to him. It was not the fact that his eyes were crying blood, but it was the dramatic change of pattern that came over his eyes. They were still a startling crimson, but his slit pupils were gone and were replaced by a circle. A circle that took on a very startling pattern of red and black that was a trademark that Kurama knew all too well, for they were the eyes of the Sharingan. "What did you do to me, old man?" growled Kurama, uncaring of his blood dropping into the basin below him. They weren't the ordinary Sharingan either. No, it was the version that enslaved his will by that Madara Uchiha, and now he shared the same cursed power with his slaver. His eyes featured a crimson circle center surrounded by 3 spear-like points jutting out with crossed ends. Between each cross was a 2-layered circle of red and black with 2 extensions of crescent blades. A much more complicated design that was only possible the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Seeing those very eyes awakened his rage that was buried deep under by Naruto himself. The ones that his only friend claimed shackled him, and they locked onto him again. It was only for a short moment, but enough that Kurama lashed out with a fist, cracking the glass on impact. Shards of glass failed to pierce his body due to his instinctual flow of dense chakra running under his skin. He came down from his high of rage and had to hold the ends of the basin to keep himself standing from his emotional exhaustion. "This is so fucked," Kurama growled, glaring at his reflection in the waters that highlighted his Sharingan eyes. "Not only am I alone, I also have to live with the same eyes as those fucking Uchiha." A small part of him wanted to rip them out to live his life blind, but he crushed it down. No use crippling himself out of spite. Kurama reined in his rage with a deep breath and stood there for a moment, figuring out to control his eyes with his chakra to at least turn them off. The former tailed beast will admit shinobi with dojutsu made it easy how they control the chakra flow to their eyes. After 10 minutes of trial and error, Kurama managed to cut off the chakra flow to his eyes and turned them back to slit pupils of a fox. A knock on the door of his room suddenly brought out the violent and paranoid instincts. His back straightened and his arms lowered themselves in an animal-like stance for a fight. He lacked in the proper ways of martial arts, but Kurama made that up with his raw strength and speed he had, despite it being very downplayed considering the limits of his current body. Red charka surrounded him in a thin aura ready to be unleashed on the aggressor. Yet all that tension was wasted on the familiar voice that spoke from the other side. "Cocoon, are you there?" said the voice of the very young vixen that Kurama remembered from the medical wing. His stance relaxed and the chakra aura diminished back into his body, slight cringing from the aching tingle on his skin from the experience. As memory served, the Kitsune yokai's name was Yusaka. He was strangely curious about the Kitsune yokai he met upon his awakening, especially the fact that she herself held an array of 9 beautiful golden foxtails. But Kurama refused to respond. He was far from the proper mood of interacting with anyone else and needed to be alone. If he stayed quiet, she will probably think he fell asleep and leave. "Come out, Cocoon," chirped Yusaka in an adorable manner. "You don't have to be afraid. I just want to be friends with you. We can talk." Again, Kurama refused to respond to Yusaka, choosing to hide behind his bed in case the Kitsune yokai suddenly kicked down the door. She seemed determined enough to do so, and it grew harder to resist as Kurama felt she was fully sincere in her intentions. Like another blonde he used to know. "If you don't want to talk, then that's okay," Yusaka said in a slightly somber tone. "You can try falling asleep, but I know you're awake. I can sense your chakra is running after all." Kurama's eyes widened in surprise on 2 points. Stunned really at the fact the Kitsune on the other side of the door had an acute sense of chakra on a level she could tell his conscious state. What was more shocking was the fact Yusaka can sense his chakra and wasn't reacting to the sight of its violent nature. Despite having quelled his wrath by Naruto, Kurama's chakra still held a corrosive effect to it, tainted with hatred. So the question was, how was Yusaka not turning into a whimpering mess? "I'll leave if you want, but I want to give you something," Yusaka said, and Kurama heard a plate being set down in front of the door. "I noticed that you weren't there for dinner. You must be very hungry, so I made something for you. Think of it as a big late-night snack, or at least that is what Ka-chan says. Good night, Cocoon." Kurama listened to the patter of feet distancing away from the door. Once his sense of hearing could not detect anything, Kurama focused on his emotional sensory skills and detected Yusaka making her way farther from his room and deeper into the palace. He let go of a relieving sigh once he was sure Yusaka went into her own room. For what felt like hours, Kurama yet again sat down on the bed with his only comfort being the blankets and Muramasa. Eventually, his musings were interrupted by the loudest growl from Kurama's stomach, as of yet followed by the pains of hunger. He cursed his body of flesh and blood and its needs to be kept alive. This was never a problem for him when he was a mountain-sized force of destruction. His eyes lingered to the door where on the other side was a whole meal to sat his new hunger, and his stomach seemed to push for assessment in its persisted growling for food. With a growling huff, Kurama walked to the door and slowly opened it inwards. His nose was hit with the still warm scent of cooked meat and sauces that were so new to him. Crimson eyes snapped to the floor where there lay the snack Yusaka left. Set on a large, square-shaped coaster was a ceramic plate of sobu noodles topped with garnishes of seaweed and some sort of root. At the side was a bowl of fresh tempura shrimp begging to be eaten. Kurama could not stop his hands from grabbing the meal and closing the door the next second. His eyes were locked on the foot right before him, and took all of his control to stop drooling. By all technical terms, this will be Kurama's first time eating food. It makes sense that he was nervous at the prospect and some deeper level scared. But his stomach pushed him forward and Kurama tentatively grabbed a tempura shrimp, the fried crust crumbling between his fingers. Without a thought of going back, Kurama bit on the crusty morsel and started his first bite of food. His eyes snapped wide at the rush of flavors he felt for the first time and he went for more. He did not care if he was indecent via eating with his hands. This food was really, really good. In minutes, Kurama had devoured the shrimp whole and began eating upon the soba, relishing the earthy taste it gave him. And to think that Yusaka said that she made this herself. Quoting from Naruto himself, she was going to make one heck of a wife for someone. Yusaka had changed into appropriate sleeping wear and was going to sleep for the night until she was hit with a sudden sneeze. And why did her face feel so hot? The next day. Do you need any help, Kurama-kun? Amaterasu asked almost pleadingly. I am fine. Kurama replied gruffly as he continued with his task at hand. The morning Kurama woke up, Amaterasu was ready to send him back to the place of his reincarnation's former home. It was there he found the bodies of his parents still there where they died. Despite being dead for a whole day, the pair showed no signs of decay with only the lack of life in their eyes and their pale skin the only indication of their state of death. Yusaka had come along in curiosity of Kukun's home, but she was kept at a distance to avoid seeing the bodies. Amaterasu herself was having a hard time looking at the bodies of Tora and Sarah without shedding a tear. Kurama did not know how to feel as he felt the emotions of his reincarnation come to surface when he saw Tora and Sarah. He felt the undying love the child had for his family reflected back at his parents, and remembered significant memories of them together. In the end, the parents died fighting for their child's survival no matter how slim they were. They were the kind of parents to gladly sacrifice themselves so their offspring can live their own life. It reminded Kurama of the sacrifice Kushina and Minato made for Naruto as a baby, cringing at the fact he was the cause for trying to kill an infant to prevent being sealed away again. These two deserved the former tailed beast's respect for their willingness to give up their lives. So Kurama gave them the best burial he could for the two. By himself and without chakra, Kurama buried his parents at the side of the home that once stood. He used the method of piling rocks he found around the area onto their bodies. Amaterasu offered her assistance multiple times, but Kurama heatedly refused every time. Tora and Sarah deserved a dedicated burial, no matter how unfashionable it was. Once Kurama placed the last stone on his father's grave, he knelt down before the two piles in silent thanks to the deceased. The dirty clothes he wore the day before were replaced with a white robes with a black sash around his waist and a blue hakama. A sheath from Muramasa was tied to his hip, but the blade itself rested on his lap. Yusaka at that moment chose to take a sneak peek, but wisely kept herself from interfering, sensing the sad atmosphere. The sad expression on Kurama's face did not sit well with Yusaka at all. I can take you home now. Amaterasu offered. I know the way home. Kurama denied, not sparing a glance to the sun goddess. His outlook on gods in general was very low considering it was the Kaguya that forced Naruto to suicide himself. From what Kurama could sense from the Shinto goddess, Amaterasu was at least far more powerful than Madara and Hashirama, but not as much to match the rabbit goddess herself. Being close to an entity with so much power put him on edge, and he was already reluctant in trusting others to begin with. Amaterasu frowned sadly at Kurama's dismissing behavior. Reluctantly, she walked away to give Kurama his privacy and approached Yusaka behind the tree. Let's go, Yusaka. Amaterasu said. Ka-chan, Yusaka said. I want to stay Kukun. He looks so sad and I want to try and help him. Amaterasu wanted to say no to her, very much so. The only reason she stopped to consider was what she found in Yusaka's eyes. There was a fire of determination in them Amaterasu rarely saw in the young kitsune. The type of fire meant to lead the yokai as its empress one day. She knew that Yusaka will deny anything she says if it get in the way of getting her goal, and her goal right now is to help Kurama. Okay, Yusaka-chan, Amaterasu said, leaning down to place a gentle kiss on Yusaka's forehead. Please make sure you are safe. Yes, Ka-chan. Yusaka chirped. Amaterasu smiled brightly as she disappeared in a flash of light to Takamagahara. Yusaka was at first dazzled by the display of light before quickly turning her attention back to Kurama. His position had not changed from his kneeling position with his head hanging low. She knew that she should approach her fellow kitsune in such a sensitive manner, but her heart told her differently. He needed closure, not the isolation that will drive further into darkness. Step by step, Yusaka approached Kurama with care. Not once did he flinch a muscle in response to Yusaka's movements, encouraging to go forward and be more bolder. He did not look at Yusaka when she was standing beside his left shoulder. The golden-haired kitsune decided to join Kurama kneeling down at his side, and that was when he finally spoke. What are you doing here? Kurama asked, his tone devoid of emotion or spite. You looked so sad. Yusaka answered in a low tone. It would be wrong to leave you alone. You're going to be disappointed, Kurama muttered. It's hopeless to help me. I don't believe so, Yusaka declared. I can help you, as long as I am your friend. Because that's what we are, right, Cocoon? Friend? Kurama thought as his mind went to a complete stop. Though the significance of her declaration was lost on Yusaka, the impact of her words ran deep to Kurama's very core. Though his appearance may change, the violence and anger that ran in his very chakra was still there. Yet not only did Yusaka sense his own chakra and still approach him, she was bold enough to become friends with the likes of him. She saw the corrosive nature of his chakra, but she didn't care about that. Just like Naruto trying to be friends with him. Even more, Yusaka's nature revived the Uzumaki's final words. Hey Kurama, can you make me a promise? This girl, thought Kurama. She's so much like you, my friend. Are you okay, Cocoon? Yusaka said with concern and had leaned closer to his face, giving him a full view of her cute, heart-shaped face that was begging to be pinched. Kurama snapped out his thoughts back to reality as his crimson orbs stared back at Yusaka's golden orbs. He reached his right hand to his face when he felt something wet drip down his face. However, Yusaka beat him to it as she leaned even closer to invade his privacy space, and to his shock stick her tongue out to lick the drop on his face that was revealed to be a tear. The former tailed beast just stayed still, too stunned to make a word as Yusaka leaned back with a beaming smile. Perhaps there's something else in her as well, thought Kurama. I don't like tears on your face, so I just ate it away, Yusaka chirped. All Yusaka got was a wide-eyed stare and a huge sweat drop from Kurama. This vixen is so weird. Thanks, I guess, Yusaka, Kurama said barely above a whisper. Yusaka's smile only got brighter hearing Kurama call her name for the first time. The crimson kitsune in question was not prepared for the full-body tackle from Yusaka. Unable to gain footing, they both fell to the ground, the regrown grass flying in the air around them. Kurama never thought he would find himself pinned down to the ground with a girl technically his age and body hugging him to death. Yay! You said my name, Cocoon, Yusaka cheered. Would it be too much trouble to say my name too? Kurama asked while trying to either wriggle out of the grip or remember how to use the substitution jutsu to get free. Nope, chirped Yusaka. Cocoon is much better. I hope to whatever godly entity that my siblings never hear that nickname. Kurama prayed mentally, but deep down knew the heavens would work against him for laughs. Suddenly, Kurama's many centuries of instinct honed in an era of war came to surface. His awkwardness washed away into a serious expression as his body tensed automatically. He reached out with his senses, picking up hostile intent around them and coming in close. It was also at that moment Kurama smelled a potent scent of brimstone from above and coming in very fast. That could only mean Yusaka! Kurama exclaimed. The female kitsune was wholly unaware of the danger that was coming towards them. Cursing in his head, Kurama wrapped his arms around Yusaka and turned her to the left to lay on their sides. He was just in time when a ball of fire impacted the ground before them in front of the graves, powerful to buffet the two kitsune in ripping winds and explosive power. Yusaka was fortunately unharmed from the attack since Kurama had used his back as a meat shield for her. Kurama will be fine himself thanks to his potent chakra giving him an enhanced durability enough to stop bleeding wounds and broken bones. Kurama made sure to hold Yusaka close to his body as they bounced off the ground multiple times. He could feel the earth scratching against his skin and ripping into his clothes. Their velocity stopped when Kurama anchored his hand into the dirt. "Cocoon, are you all right?" exclaimed Yusaka. "Fine," Kurama groaned, not used to the pain of his body. Well, look what we have here," sneered a voice dripping with ill intent. Kurama craned his neck back to find in the air a man in a stylized black cloak of unknown design to Japanese culture. Most of his form was hidden away in the cloak with just a pair of golden-pointed shoes peeking out of the bottom. The shoulders were equipped in pauldrons in royal blue with purple edge. It was shaped in a sheet of metal that was sharpened at the tip that in Kurama's opinion looked ridiculous. On the chest was a buckle of metal that showed a flame with the face of a fanged monster. Under a hood was a bearded face of black hair with sickening purple eyes leered down at the pair of kitsune and a cruel smirk stretched his face. He was floating in the air thanks to 3 pairs of bat-like wings, revealing himself to be a high-class devil. The situation got worse when more stepped out of the surroundings. Kurama could feel the dark energies emanating from them that only devils wore, and they all had a nasty intent that reminded the former tailed beast of the likes of Orochimaru. Cruel smirks showed white teeth and eyes stared lecherously at the yokai, mostly on Yusaka. "This is interesting," spoke the high-class devil, dropping to the ground in front of Kurama. "I find out that 3 of my men were killed yesterday, and here I find 2 foxes all alone. Look at the 2 of them. They both have 9 tails," one noted, pointing to their fox appendages. "I can see that," replied the leader. "They can make good additions for my peerage. Especially the girls for her future services." "Damn it, and I had pushed Amaterasu away," thought Kurama, hating himself for that tidbit. "But first," the leader sneered with a crueler smirk, "we need to teach them a little lesson on obedience." The devil swung a flame-coated leg that crashed into Kurama's ribs, cracking the air from the force. His grip on Yusaka failed him and he was sent flailing across the ground like a kicked ball. His high-speed travel was only stopped when Kurama crashed into the trunk of a tree hard enough to topple the whole trunk. Kurama bit his lip to hold back the groan of pain from the blow at his side that must have left a bruise to the bone. "Would you look at that?" said one of the devils by its feminine tone revealed to be a woman. "The little kid is a lot tougher than we thought." "Then let's see how much we can break him," chuckled another man as the surrounding devils began to close in on him. But Kurama ignored the devils leering upon him. Rather his focus was entirely on Yusaka on the other side with the high-class devil towering over him. The devil himself picked Yusaka up by her hair, revealing her face marred with dirt and barely held back tears from the pain. He made the 9-tailed yokai look at him face to face, meeting his gaze that spoke now goodwill. Those eyes spoke of deplorable things to break her. All of it scared Yusaka, and Kurama see that fear clearly in Yusaka's golden orbs. He hated the fear in those eyes of Yusaka's, a stark reminder to himself when he and his siblings were left alone in the elemental nations without their father. She did not deserve such cruel treatment because of the selfishness of others. "Hey Kurama, can you make me a promise?" The voice of Naruto echoed in his head, but this time choosing to motivate him. He refused to let this happen to her. She was a stranger in a strange yet the second person in his life to want to be his friend. It was all worth it to shield her from harm. "Wherever you find yourself in, promise me you'll make some precious people for you to cherish and protect them with your life. Kurama, once the Kyuubi no Kitsune, will not let harm come to Yusaka. The strongest of the tailed beast and the first breath of life from the Sage of 6 Paths shall protect Yusaka by any means necessary. Even if it means slaughtering the ones who would do her ill. I, Kurama, first life of Hagoromo, will not allow this." Kurama roared in his mind. In that moment, the moniker of the fox demon came alive. All the devils went still at the intense malice and hatred that flooded their own ill intents like a tsunami summoned by Susanoo. Their eyes traveled back to Kurama, the source of all that raw hatred made power. He had risen on all 4 of his limbs in a stance of an actual fox ready to hunt, and his 9 tails flailed in the air menacingly. His features became more feral as his eyes morphed into a glowing red M's and his whisker marks became more defined. Red chakra seeped off his skin to form a bubbling aura around him, and as his nails grew into claws and teeth turned into fang. All the while, his crimson eyes with the complicated pattern glared at every devil in his sight. And then he moved. There was no describe the speed that was on the higher echelons of high class. Only the leader of the devils managed to see a red blur that snapped to move upon his servants. His first victim fell with a punch to his gut that pierced flesh from the brute force, and thankfully Yasaka never got to see it. 3 of his tails snapped to the devils on his right, wrapping around their necks before snapping them. His right fist, still buried in the previous devil, slashed out of the wound, so the claws slashed deeply into the female devil beside him from hip to shoulder, shredding bone as it went. It took no less than that to kill all 8 of the devils surrounding him, and all because of sheer power and speed he possessed. Then Kurama's Sharingan eyes locked onto the high class holding the killing intent to cause upon him. The devil in question froze at the look of pure murder that he had only experienced from Rizavam Lucifer. Kurama's very hatred was suffused in his red chakra, only held down by his iron will. How? Thought the devil, sensing chakra levels that were beyond his magical prowess. How does a child, a 9-tailed kitsune even, have this much power? His train of thought was harshly put to pause when he felt a blow to his gut that sent him rocketing back, and in effect release Yasaka from his grip. The golden princess was gently caught in Kurama's arms, who settled her down on the ground. As he looked at the golden-haired kitsune, his features softened compared to the earlier malice. Naruto, you made so many promises that you wanted to grant, thought Kurama. This time, I'll make a promise for you, and I'll start by protecting this girl, my friend Yasaka. Cocoon, Yasaka said softly. Yasaka, said Kurama with a rare gentleness in his voice, can you please cover your eyes and ears? Yasaka nodded, squeezing her eyes shut and covering her ears. With her silent to her surroundings, Kurama turned his attention back to the devil that started this mess. The one who had those devils come to his home and killed his parents. The same devil that dared to hurt Yasaka, an innocent in all this. He showed no mercy, disappearing right before him to slash across his chest, making the buckle on his chest come loose. Blood poured off Kurama's fingers, but his stare remained a cold fury. Next, he jumped up and grabbed the devil by his face to smash down on the ground with his body weight. No matter how much the devil struggled, he could only glare back at Kurama's eyes. For your crimes, I will deliver a very fitting punishment, Kurama said. His Sharingan spun rapidly as he flexed one of his eyes powers for the first time. Tsukiyomi. Tsukiyomi realm. For the devil, his whole world changed into red expanse where he stood on a singular pool. He was tied to a cross by barbed wire, and standing across from him was the brat himself. The eyes that drilled into his very soul that glowed more ominously than the world he was stuck on. For the next 72 hours, I will torture and break both spirit and mind, Kurama announced. On a side note, this is my first time using this, so please scream your compliments. Before the devil's eyes, the boy then morphed into something truly horrific. Where there once stood a 5-year-old yokai now was a giant fox of crimson fur as tall as a mountain. Black lips revealed canines ready to tear flesh apart, hands sporting claws longer than his body, and 9 tails raised into the red heavens. All the devil could do was scream in terror as the giant fox's maw clamped down on him. That same process would repeat over and over and over again till there was nothing left to the identity of the devil himself. Real world. Yasaka opened her eyes when she felt someone poking her shoulder and found Kurama standing above her. None of the devils were in sight, and her friend only looked slightly messed up from the earlier kick. They're gone, Yasaka, Kurama assured, offering his hand. You're safe. Thank you, Cocoon, Yasaka said, taking Kurama's hand. However, when Yasaka tried to stand up, her left foot gave out. Kurama looked down to find that her left heel looked badly bruised. A growl left his throat at the fact the devil was able to harm Yasaka like that. There's no way she was going to walk by herself to the palace in Kyoto. That left on solution, and in all honesty Kurama did not know what to think about it. Hold on, Kurama said. Yasaka widened her eyes when she suddenly found herself on Kurama's back. Her arms automatically wrapped around Kurama's neck and she felt his hands under her thighs. She blushed in embarrassment, but Yasaka kept her hold on Kurama lest she fall from his back. Cocoon, you don't have to do this, Yasaka protested. It is sort of my fault, Kurama admitted. I didn't react sooner and you got hurt because of it. Fine. Yasaka pouted as she snuggled into his red hair that she admitted felt so soft. Your chakra feels so warm. That made Kurama pause momentarily in his step. That description of his chakra was only associated to Naruto's. He should know since he was trapped in his body since the boy's birth. It really brought the question of what Yasaka really saw in Kurama's chakra. The crimson-orange furred kitsune pushed those thoughts aside and continued his walk back to the palace of Kyoto. All the while, Kurama never noticed the contented smile on Yasaka's face. When they returned, it took considerable persuasion on both their parts to Amaterasu that Yasaka had tripped on her foot to get the bruise. Kurama returned to his room then to himself. Upon entering, he collapsed on the bed releasing small grunts of pain. The entire time his body was racked with burning aches from the strain of using his potent chakra and he had endured the pain till the end. The simple answer to this pain was because his body was not mature enough to handle the pressure of using his chakra. The solution to this problem annoyed Kurama to end in its tediousness and simplicity. Kurama had to get started on strengthening his body in training. Since his chakra was much more potent and volatile than anyone else, he was going to have to push his body on the level those spandex-wearing freaks. On another note, Kurama had to get in the habit of mastering martial arts and getting kenjutsu. He was in a new world, but he was not foolish enough to think that they weren't other special cases of powerhouses that dominated the world, and that was excluding the existence of other gods. Thankfully, Kurama had a mental library at his call from his time in his hosts, especially Mito and Kushina for jutsus and eventually Naruto's. The blonde's shadow clone was going to be a real kicker for him. But in hindsight, all Naruto had going for him were shadow clones and different Rasengans. Thought Kurama. That fucking Leaf Village. He could have been so much stronger with the right teaching, enough to stomp the fucking Uchiha and Pain to the ground. I am almost glad Naruto died so he would not have to live in a lie that held back his potential. Hell, the kid could have rivaled father if he had the right training. By all accounts, Naruto should have been Junin when he came back to the village with the pervert, but that bastard only wanted him to use my chakra. That fool never realized he could be stronger not just with my chakra. Hours had gone by in his mental tirade and recovery that night had fallen. That was then his door was knocked on a second time. Kurama lifted his head again to look at the door, but it didn't take genius to know who it was. Hi Cocoon. Yasaka chirped on the other side. You weren't around for the rest of the day. You must be pretty lazy if you put yourself in here all day in bed. Oi, I am laying here because my body is in pain. Kurama mentally shouted, but it was half of a lie. I knew you would be hungry, Yasaka said. I made you food again. I made more this time since you missed out on lunch and I kinda hope we can share this time. But I get you want to be alone, so it'll be off. Yasaka set down the plates and bowls of tempura and miso soup at the floor of the door. She was happy that at least he ate his cooking. That was enough for her. So imagine her surprise when the door creaks open and sees Kukun's face peeking through. You can come in if you want, Kurama said, opening the door just enough to let her pass through. The wide smile on Yasaka's face was all the answer he needed. They both carried the homemade meal inside the room where they ate side by side in relative silence on top of the bed. Kurama ate his meal with gusto, but was reining most his impulse to not be a fool in front of Yasaka. But she certainly wasn't easy with how good she made it. Do you like it? Yasaka asked, giggling how Kurama rushed at the bowl of miso soup. I do. It was lie. The food was doing heaven on his taste buds. Your cooking is astounding. Yasaka blushed. Thank you. 30 minutes later, all the pair had were empty bowls and plates dirtied with crumbs and soup. Kurama could already feel the call of sleep on his body. He was going to ask Yasaka to go to her own room to sleep until he felt a weight on his shoulder. The crimson-orange-haired kitsune looked in shock that Yasaka had fallen asleep and was using his shoulder as a pillow. A smile broke on Kurama's face seeing the contented smile on the girl's face, warming his heart. Then he too fell under the spell of the night, his head falling on back on the soft pillow standing tall at the head of the bed. An hour later, Amaterasu arrived in the hall, searching for Yasaka as it was an hour past her curfew. Her interests piqued seeing a door still open, knowing that it was Kurama's. When she looked into the room, Her heart fluttered and a warm smile graced her beautiful face. She hardly wanted anything else in the world than immortalizing the sight of two people precious together sleeping together after a shared meal. It almost made the goddess squeal at the sight. "Cocoon, where did you go?" A 7-year-old Yasaka chirped playfully. "How are you so good at this?" "Because I am a sneaky fox." The voice of Kurama came from above, but Yasaka found nothing but the branches of a tree when she looked up. "You gotta try harder. I will not lose to you in tag, Cocoon," Yasaka declared with a fiery passion. Off on the sidelines leaning against the paper doors was the sun goddess Amaterasu. A warm smile plastered on her face as she continued to watch her two favorite kits of crimson and gold chase each other in one of the palace's many gardens. Or more accurately, Kurama having fun at Yasaka's expense with the use of clones of himself, while the soon-to-be leader of the yokai stubbornly persisted trying to tag Kurama. Not once did Yasaka expect that Kurama was using physical clones to trick her. It still baffled Amaterasu how Kurama, the second nine-tailed kitsune, had invented a chakra technique that created an actual physical clone of the caster. These clones shared the same personality as the original and can apparently transfer knowledge of what they learned back to the caster. In fact, the real Kurama was off to the side near a pond studying from a book for his own while more were on the roofs practicing sword katas of all things. The only downside was that the clones were not that durable unless considerably more chakra was put into the clone, and Kurama had a lot of chakra. It had been a little over 3 years ago since Kurama had joined Yasaka's life, and it had been all the more better for Amaterasu's surrogate daughter to have a friend. The kitsune's friendship grew close, more so on Yasaka's part as she would often go to his room with her home cooking. Amaterasu had more than once found the pair having fallen asleep together, and she had to bite down the urge to squeal at how cute they were. What troubled the sun goddess though was what Kurama was putting himself through, and not 1 week after moving to the palace did he suddenly start training. Training as in preparing for war with how hard he pushed himself. Kurama pushed his bodies through exercises no child should ever do, studied katas of the sword to master Muramasa when Amaterasu never even thought of teaching him to begin with, and honing his chakra in a way that Amaterasu never imagined. His strange way of using chakra somehow implemented the powers of the elements and manipulating chakra in ways that proved more destructive than magic. The implications that Kurama were downright unheard of as the only known ways of the use of chakra has always been through senjutsu and yujutsu. Yet Kurama was taking the uses of chakra leagues ahead in the use of everyday life. Just yesterday Amaterasu almost jumped all the way back to the Shinto heaven when she found Kurama standing upside down on the ceiling, and it was only from Kurama's explanation that he was focusing chakra at his feet to do just that. He also received a scolding for all the holes he blasted on the walls and ceiling. Amaterasu tried finding some way to rationalize his reasons, and on some level didn't want him to do this. She could not deny the warrior within him and Kurama's protectiveness over Yasaka. It was sweet really, but still mind-boggling how far Kurama was pushing himself, and it was only thanks to his unusual rate of recovery and healing factor that he was always up and about. And she had no idea how to approach in the way Kurama was using his chakra since it was obviously working. The sun goddess begrudgingly hired tutors for Kurama in martial arts that would visit occasionally. A kendo master would have been nice, but Kurama denied, saying he had no need and instead was teaching himself. Still, much of what Kurama wanted to do Amaterasu forcefully had to hold him back since he was still a child. She should have made sure Tora didn't fill her son's head all about cool things of Japan with all the fighting and swords. He was always so infatuated of those concepts himself as a child, and now it was passed on to Kurama. At least he had his mother's seriousness when it was needed. Kurama had only really opened up to Yasaka the most compared to other denizens, including Amaterasu. He was awfully very reclusive, and was not prone to make any sort of conversation unless Yasaka asked him to. If only she knew that everything that Kurama was training himself in was from total memory from his time within his 3 hosts of Mito, Kushina, and Naruto, and he spent the past 3 years roaming down his memories to pick up useful pieces. From the former 2 Kurama gained a better understanding how to use his chakra in his new physical body. It was not like the chakra network that humans from the elemental nations described, but a vast pool that filled his whole body. The same could be said about Yasaka's and every other yokai's chakra configuration when he looked at them with his M's, always emitting an aura of chakra around their bodies instead of having it contained in some sort of pathways like a nervous system. Then there was what happened when he tried using senjutsu, or at least how he remembered how it was down in his time with Naruto. However, natural chakra came much more naturally to him since his own chakra was a mix of nature, physical, spiritual, and whatever existed in Kaguya. The problem was that the moment Kurama opened himself to nature, he was hit with so much raw malice that it threatened to turn him back into the raging monster that he was known for. With sheer willpower did Kurama make it through and cut the connection, but the experience shocked him. Apparently, the natural energy of this world was highly imbalanced due to how humans in this world were allowed too much freedom and were polluting the planet. Yet another reason why Kurama absolutely abhorred the human race. Give them enough power and they would destroy their very home without a second thought. Kenjutsu was solely from his memories of Kushina, limited as they were considerably. She was his least favorite fan. Not much one can see of the outside world when one is impaled by golden chains. Mito was second in being tolerable, allowing him to view the outside world, but still putting up the pretense that he was too dangerous to be let out. Only Naruto had his respect as he promised with all his body to free Kurama and be his friend, and from the Gaki did Kurama learn the most of offensive jutsu. He almost missed the gobsmacked look on Amaterasu's face when he produced a Rasengan, which was rather easy considering it was inspired from his tailed beast bomb, and that when he learned the ways of chakra were vastly different than they were in the elemental nations. They did not harness the elements of nature and rarely had any techniques dedicated to complete offense. There wasn't any existence of anything related to ninjutsu on a destructive scale, and the closest variant of genjutsu was yujutsu that dealt in wide-scale illusions. That made his knowledge one of a kind and seemingly prodigal in his discovery. Kurama felt oddly respectful of the yokai race at how they used chakra for more subtle arts instead of direct destruction, but he also saw the apparent weakness they had against other races that used a force called magic. The closest yokai had to offense was their variant of senjutsu, which instead of granting them immense physical enhancement, the senjutsu gifts them far more reflexes in tuki and disruption of one's ki, the physical aspect of chakra. Should he try and teach these people the techniques from home? He wanted to say no, knowing that his knowledge has a chance of starting what the elemental nations became. The bare silver lining of that proposal was that it was impossible to teach humans since they never were gifted chakra, with some rare humans only being able to use either kai or ki. Idly, Kurama thought of teaching Yusaka a few tricks, and the mental image of Yusaka throwing out Rasengans, making shadow clones, or breathing fire was honestly adorably hilarious. Speaking of his new friend in this world, Kurama glanced up from his hiding spot. He had to hold in his snickers watching Yusaka failing to catch his many shadow clones sneaking circles around the golden kitsune. She had no noticeable change over the 3 years compared to himself, who looked more fit, but he could not deny there was a greater radiance to Yusaka. An amused smile appeared on Kurama's human face as he went back to the book on this world's uses of chakra. Found you. Only to find himself caught off guard and tackled by a golden blur that was the real Yusaka having somehow sneaked up on him. Amaterasu openly released a beautiful watching Yusaka tackle the shocked Kurama into the pond water. Koi fish jumped in surprise and bolted far away from the duo. The pair came up simultaneously, both of their clothes drenched and soaked. Kurama's mane of red hair that he rarely allowed to cut was stubborn cut to his face, and Yusaka's golden waterfall became shinier and smoother. Despite their state, Yusaka continued to giggle incessantly with a Cheshire grin of victory while Kurama was sputtering nonsense. How? Kurama managed to say. Hell, he didn't even sense Yusaka close to him to answer. Yusaka gestured back to the main garden area under the sakura tree where his own clones were flabbergasted. Kurama could sense a fluctuation of chakra in the air as the space distorted around the main garden area where his clones were equally flabbergasted. The Yusaka in the garden disappeared as if it was a mirage, and only then did Kurama sense that the whole area was covered in chakra. I am the best at Yujutsu, Cocoon. Yusaka chirped in pride. I've been learning more from my classes, and my teachers just started teaching me chakra control. Kurama nodded dumbly, still in stock surprise that he was caught off guard by Yusaka of all people. That also revealed to him an unknown strength of Yujutsu. While Genjutsu injected the target with foreign chakra to mess with their senses, he now knew that Yujutsu blanketed an entire area in chakra to produce the illusions. It was the only explanation in how Yusaka was able to fool all of his clones the entire time. No one would be able to detect it, and it could blank the signature of the caster. How did you sneak up on me and how did you find me? Kurama could not help but ask. Yasaka giggled. Silly Cocoon spends too much time in his book. The former Biju had the decency to blush in embarrassment. It was such a stupid reason of how he was caught, but he had never actually read a book until now. In his old life, it was either sleeping in some valley or sleeping in one of his hosts. Except that habanero that refused to let him sleep with those fucking chains. Fine, you win. Kurama relented. What would you have me do? Huh? Yasaka was not expecting that from Kurama. You caught fair and square. Kurama briefed. Now, I have to do something for you and I can't go back on it. Do whatever you want with me. He may or not be trying to tease the poor girl if the bright blush evident on her face was anything to go by. Her thoughts were in a wild jumble, and in some corner of her mind came the suggestion of kissing all over Kukun's cute face and licking his whisker marks. Steam started to come out of her ears as the thought became louder before she shook her head to rid of the likable idea. And no, not that, Yasaka exclaimed frantically. Don't put those thoughts in my head, Kukun. Hee. Kurama snickered. A furious pout etched on Yasaka's face before it suddenly turned mischievous. Kurama's laughs turned back into sputters when his face was splashed by pond water. He gave a deadpanned look at the laughing golden kitsune before in all his maturity reciprocated with a wave of water half of Yasaka's height crashing harmlessly on Yasaka with the aid of his tails. It soon devolved into an exchange of laughter and splashes as the two kitsune yokai continued to play in the pond water. The Crimson Yokai would never admit, but this was honestly the most fun he had in over 1,000 years. Throughout all of this Amaterasu watched with such a warm smile, and wished she had some sort of device to take an image of this forever. Yasaka truly was a positive influence on Kurama, healing his spirit from the trauma at the loss of his parents. He was oddly mature since then, no longer acting like a child most of the time. His genuine were mostly towards Yasaka, or were of a sickening sort when he discovered something truly destructive in his self-taught ways of chakra. That's enough, you two. Amaterasu interrupted, making Kurama and Yasaka pause in their motions. You can play in the water when you go take a bath. Yasaka brightened up. Can Kukun and I use the big one in the palace? Kurama did not know why, but at that moment he felt a sense of doom befall him. As far as he understood, each room had their own bathroom to use, so it confused him what she meant by the big one. Unless Yasaka meant one of the hot springs in the top levels of one of the towers of the palace. There were still new places that for Kurama to discovering in this overly sized palace. Not even daimyos from the elemental nations that he saw via Mito ever had this big of a palace. Perhaps it is the perk when one of the patrons is the head of the Shinto pantheon. Imagine Kurama's surprise when he learned the world was filled with gods of different pantheons. He was especially displeased of the Greek gods currently inhabiting the American continent, as they reminded Kurama too much of that bloody pervert that did nothing for Naruto. Perhaps. Amaterasu mused. But do you need servants to help wash you? I can clean myself, Kurama said as he wasn't about to have strangers wash his body, especially when he was naked. Kurama stiffened when he saw a gleam in Amaterasu's eyes. A very familiar gleam he had only seen from Kushina when she went into matchmaker frenzy all over the village. He suddenly felt like he was piece of meat and being wondered where he should be plated with. That's wonderful, Amaterasu said with a sweet smile. Then it's not too much trouble for you to help Yasaka in the bath. Kurama's head went blank for a moment before it went into overdrive. He wasn't entirely sure what was happening, but he definitely something in that sentence was not right. Yasaka's reaction was more profound as her entire body went red with a blush. Ka-chan! Exclaimed Yasaka. Even though it was Yasaka's plan to hang out with Kurama in the hot springs, she didn't actually mean for that. To the little girl, it seemed too intimate, but if she were older it would be more along the lines of perverse. A perverse act that she wouldn't too opposed to. Fine. Amaterasu brushed off. Go get yourselves cleaned up. Today is a special day as some good friends of mine are going to visit the palace. Hopefully, both will be there to make some friends as they are bringing some children of their own, and I've heard great things about them. Kurama scoffed. What could be so special that I have to go to some lousy party? Well, it would interest you that these children have specifically asked to see you, Kurama-kun. Amaterasu said. A little blue Nekosho and the last Tanuki yokai to be exact. Kurama at first waved it off until realization came to mind. Could it be them? Matabi? Shukaku? There was no other reasonable explanation how two random yokai knew him at all unless it was the reincarnations of his siblings. He was still unaware of where Son Goku could be, but at least now he had an idea that Matabi and Shukaku were both in the territory of Kyoto, and were coming back here today. For the first time, Kurama was looking forward to meeting his siblings. After all, he had to act the part of the older brother and put Shukaku in his place if he got too rowdy. Later that night, Kurama and Yasaka were neatly dressed in royal kimonos of crimson and gold respectively. The former of the kitsune pair had to resist the urge to scratch his head where his mane of hair had been tamed to a tail to make him look proper. The fact Yasaka made it for him and the fact he didn't want to make himself a delinquent was the only reason he did ruin the hairstyle. Led by Amaterasu, the pair walked into a wide courtyard near the front gates of the palace where a small party was formed. Both yokai of the supernatural and human of Edo, Japan were conversing in random chatter that made Kurama's ears twitch in annoyance. All talk momentarily paused and their eyes went straight to the kitsune pair. Most eyes went on him with a mix of shock and curiosity due to his open array of 9 crimson tails waving behind him ominously. He noted that some of the human snobs that came to Kyoto were sending perverted leers at Yasaka, imaging what she would be older. Amaterasu would have given fear into the mortal, but was beaten to the punch when Kurama let a trickle of his wrath at these men, making them quivering wrecks. The yokai were however amused at the display. Ninjin. Kurama growled. Though his hatred had diminished mostly, it was still there whenever he saw humans. It still festered when he saw the filthy greed and lust in their eyes. They're a chaotic race that are a danger to themselves and the rest of the world. Give them a stick and soon they'll sharpen them into spears. Give them rocks and they'll mold them into clubs. Give them charka and they will wage unending war for power. He reined in his temper as he felt Yasaka grasp his left hand, which was almost twice the size in comparison. Kurama knew that he was growing above average height of most children his age, especially for a yokai. There was certainly a lot of attention he grabbed from the female populace of the party. On sight of Amaterasu, the humans immediately bowed before the goddess, but Kurama could sense most of it was false praise to appease to the sun goddess. She could see as well as the light in her eyes appeared colder. No doubt she was going to find who let these people into her palace and dispose of them for their incompetence. Beautiful as always, Amaterasu-sama, spoke the voice of an old man. When Kurama saw the speaker, he felt a bead of cold sweat when he sensed the aura the geezer was emitting. He was obviously not human by his monkey-like features of golden fur and a wrinkled, creased face of dark skin. He had the figure of a primary school child, and prayer beads adorned his neck. But there was no denying the aura of power Kurama felt from the monkey yokai. An aura that Kurama had only seen from Hagoromo himself. He bet that this guy would give Kaguya definite trouble to deal with. "Ah, Sun Wukong, a pleasure to see you." Amaterasu greeted kindly. "And who is this new little gaki beside you?" Kurama locked eyes with the second monkey yokai standing beside the identified Sun Wukong. He looked like Wukong with a lava-red coloring of fur and human-like complexion of skin. The boy was definitely Kurama's, if just a little younger by at least a year, and had a mess of shaggy red hair on his head that never went past his shoulders. A singular red furry tail was wrapped around the waist. The Maneki yokai locked eyes with Kurama, and instantly there was a snap of realization of who it was in front of them. "Ah, this is one of my descendants that took my interest," Sun Wukong introduced. "This is Son Goku. Careful, he's got a boastful attitude." "And you're made of old farts," grumbled Son Goku, causing the Buddha to laugh. Knowing and believing were two different things when Kurama stared at who was his reincarnated younger brother, Son Goku the four-tailed ape. The species that he was born as suited him, and at some perspective there really wasn't much of a change with Son Goku compared to how Kurama was born as. While Kurama was left stunned by his brother's sudden appearance, Son Goku was giving him a smile. "What's wrong, Fox?" Son Goku said. "Cat got your tongue?" "Well, I haven't gotten it yet." Kurama stiffened when he felt his personal space being invaded by a pair of slender arms going around him, and the heavy scent of ember and cat. He turned his head around and found the invasive culprit to be a young girl of 5 years old. A waterfall of dark blue hair with black tips went down the back over a black yukata with an obi string, but it was loose enough to get a peek at the bare shoulders. She was a whole head shorter and then some than Kurama, which was smaller than Yasaka by a few inches. Blue cat ears sat on her head and two cattails swished behind her. The most notable feature were the heterochromatic eyes of separate yellow and green that belonged to one person. "Matabi," Kurama said in a bare whisper. "Now I've got your tongue." Matabi teased, pressing closer into Kurama's back. "Hello, Kurama-ni-san. MMMMH, your back feels so solid." Kurama's right twitched at Matabi. If it were any other girl doing this to him, he would be a bit bashful. He was more than familiar with Matabi's unusual antics that involved invading her siblings' personal spaces beyond moral boundaries. She always found some odd pleasure in getting bashful expression from everyone, and Kurama was the only seemingly immune due to his immense size. Despite being stuck in a real body, it only served to annoy Kurama. Gee. However, it could not be said the same for Yasaka. Kurama glanced at his friend, only to sweat drop at the intense stare Yasaka's golden orbs were laying in on Matabi. He could physically feel the intensity directed at Matabi, which caught the reincarnated Nekosha's interest, and her golden orbs were ignited in a raging inferno. A slight grin grew on her pink lips. "Era, who's this delicious golden wonder?" Matabi wondered, loosening her hug on Kurama. "She looks like a cuter, golden you, Kurama-kun." In a surprising motion, Yasaka took her chance to pull Kurama closer to herself, wrapping her arms around Kurama's left arm, and away from Matabi. She continued her intense stare on a surprised Matabi, who in turn leveled a mischievous look to meet Yasaka. Kurama was unfortunately caught in the middle of this, seeing a spark ignite between the two yokai, and the only getting amusement out of this whole thing was Son Goku. "Ah, Kurama, what did you land yourself into?" Son Goku chuckled. Kurama's response was to growl at the prodding at the former four-tailed Biju while thinking up of some way to dissolve this situation. It felt like a war was going to erupt between Matabi and Yasaka, and he had no idea why. He was just now starting to understand how women were so strange. "Era, you seem awfully close to Kurama-kun," Matabi noted. "You don't mind if I borrow him from you, did you?" Yasaka did not speak at first. Her teeth were barred in a failed attempt to seem dangerous, and her 9 golden tails were arrayed in a way similar to Kurama. The grip on his arm grew tighter, and Kurama was starting to question his blood circulation in his limb. Then Yasaka had to say what should have stayed forbidden from his siblings. "Ku-kun is my ku-kun," exclaimed Yasaka with the most fire and conviction in her voice. Kurama so wanted to leave his body right now and enter an incorporeal state to escape the humiliation coming towards him. Matabi and Son Goku froze on the spot as still as statues as soon as they heard Yasaka's pet name for Kurama. The first to break was Son Goku, who made a snort-like sound and holding a hand over his hand. It started off softly from Matabi, but grew by the second until both Nekosha were roaring in laughter. "Ku-kun." Matabi laughed. "Ku-kun, ha 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 ha. This is the best day of my freaking new life," cackled Son Goku. Yasaka blinked in confusion at the duo's reaction, but Kurama was shaking on the spot. His face was strained and bright red in a mix of embarrassment and rage. He wanted to blame Yasaka for letting the nickname slip out, but he could not honestly blame his friend. What he can do was stare at his siblings with absolute murder flashing in his crimson eyes. "Shut up," Kurama growled. "What's the matter, Ku-kun?" Matabi teased, getting a tick mark from Kurama. "Don't like your nickname, Ku-kun?" J.I. This had the added effect of riling up Yasaka even more. Her hold on Kurama increased with her arms now around his chest, and her stare turned into a heated glare. He also noted ghostly blue ember coming off her body. "Only I get to call him Ku-kun," Yasaka growled, and he could feel her increase in chakra. Not some feline hussy. Kurama had to hand it to Yasaka, she knew how to throw insults. He smirked, seeing Matabi's grin strain, while Son Goku continued to laugh at the free show. A new kid came onto the scene at that moment behind Son Goku, appearing the same age as Matabi. His skin was tanned and featured sand-colored hair and yellow eyes that held a wild look to them. On his head were a pair of sand-colored animal ears similar to a raccoon, and from his back came a massive raccoon tail as long as his body. When he spotted Kurama, he almost went ballistic. "Kurama Teme, I finally found why," the Tanuki exclaimed, only for Son Goku to cover his mouth. "Shut up, Shukaku, Son Goku said. You're going to spoil the fun. Reluctantly, Shukaku agreed and stayed on the sidelines to watch the show between Matabi and Yasaka with Kurama caught in the middle. Era, you are a feisty one. Matabi said, a faint blue aura of power surrounding her. But I so much want to call him Cocoon, especially when I cuddle him. Stop egging each other or I am going to die from the battle, Kurama lamented in his head. You'll never have Cocoon, street cat, hissed Yasaka, a golden aura of chakra surrounding the nine-tailed kitsune. Masumi, what are you doing? Spoke a feminine voice to turn mortal man into putty. Matabi's aura instantly dissipated and her attention was entirely driven elsewhere. Approaching the Nekosho was a woman of sexual beauty that she could create lust from the most reserved of humans. Her hair was a stark black like the night sky and her eyes were a glowing yellow. Surprisingly, she had an array of 8 cattails swishing behind her. Ka-san. Matabi said. I hope you are not troubling them, especially Yasaka-heim. Matabi's mother said sternly. Matabi's face paled and she glanced at Yasaka in full realization who the kitsune was. She was too busy to one-up on Yasaka. She didn't take the time to figure who the kitsune yokai actually was, the next leader of their race. Ah, Fujimai, how nice to see you. Amaterasu greeted, returning from her conversation with Sun Wukong and Shi, the Shinto god of death that decided to come here. Amaterasu-sama. The 8-tailed Nekosho bowed. It has been a long time. It certainly has, Fujimai-san. Added Sun Wukong. Over 3 centuries since we last met. I heard you married again. Indeed I have. Fujimai said, gesturing to Matabi. This is my daughter, Matabi Taju. I have to say, she's an extraordinary addition to the Hellcat clan. Speaking of, how has that been going on for you since the closing of the Shinto territory borders to outsiders? Sun Wukong asked, stroking his beard. Fujimai frowned. Things have been tense back home at our estate. Devils have constantly demanded entrance to our home, and without the Tengu guards there would have been more successful break-ins. Recently, I have been getting death threats from underworld nobles to have some of my people in their peerages. Each word from Fujimai had the effect of dimming the brightness on Amaterasu's face and replacing it with sheer wrath. Yasaka shivered as she felt the wrath from her mother while Kurama stood strong before the goddess power. The air started to heat up and the cool of the night was turned into hottest of summer days. I will make sure that no such so-called threats come through. Amaterasu promised, her voice laced with so much venom in contrast to her bright demeanor. They certainly are getting more bold in this new Cold War, added a man. Except he wasn't a man at all, given the aura of death Kurama sensed that could make Kaguya uneasy. The man was as tall as Amaterasu and almost bland in appearance with a white, baggy shikshu. His skin was white as snow lacking any life, his black hair was shaved to the scalp, and his eyes were pitch black lacking pupils. Yasaka whimpered, feeling the entity's aura of death in contrast to the life-giving chakra, and only Kurama's amazing warm chakra kept her safe. But the former Biju could tell the entity before him held no such ill intent, as it was a part of his nature as the death god of the Shinto pantheon, Shinigami or Shi for short. Those black eyes narrowed on Kurama, and there was a look of familiarity in those black orbs. He leaned close to Kurama till they were on eye level. Shi's gaze passed Kurama's skin and into his very soul until they widened what they saw. Hello, Kurama-san. Shi greeted. It certainly has been a while. Kurama's eyes widened. You mean you? Shinigami nodded, confirming Kurama's shock. This death god was the very same entity the Yondaime summoned that split his soul and sealed him away in Naruto's body. Anger and fear gripped at Kurama's heart at the one who continued his imprisonment for the 3rd time and split his very soul in half. To think that you have come to this realm, Shi said. How interesting. I mean you no harm, Kurama-san. It is not my place anymore to interfere. Shi straightened up and made his leave of the 4. Fujimai had escorted Matabi away to talk to more guests at the gathering, and Son Goku was dragging away a struggling Shukaku. All that left was Kurama, Amaterasu, and Yasaka, who was still clinging onto Kurama's back. Cocoon. Yasaka whispered into his fox ears, you won't leave me, right? The question made Kurama freeze. Using his sensation of emotions, he felt the fear gripping Yasaka's heart. Perhaps that exchange with Matabi had a more profound effect on Yasaka than he thought. He was after all her closest friend, and something more. Of course not, Kurama said in complete honesty. Then she did the most unexpected thing. Her head moved in a blur up to his shoulder and bit hard on Kurama's exposed skin. Pain seared through him as her teeth sunk through his skin, but it immediately went away when she pulled back. He rubbed the spot finding no blood, and turned to Yasaka in confusion. "What was that for?" exclaimed Kurama. "Oh," Yasaka responded as though coming out of a daze. Did I?" Yasaka failed in the rest of her words as her face etched in a mix of terror and embarrassment. Her face scrunched up and grew bright red as blood rushed to her skin. Small hands slapped on her cheeks to hold in haggard breathing until she couldn't hold it in anymore. "Iya!" Kurama blinked in astonishment as Yasaka disappeared in a sprint that left a dust trail all the way back to the palace. His mind failed to come up with a logical reason of her reaction, and looked to Amaterasu to answers. By the expression on her face, she had no interest in telling if it ruined her amusement. Seriously, what the heck was that about? 5 years has passed, and Kurama has unfortunately hit a roadblock in his training. 4 months ago, he had mastered the manipulation of his chakra into the elements and found a way to use genjutsu and yujutsu with his Sharingan. That was good enough for him since Kurama was hesitant in using the same eyes as the clan that wanted to chain him down. The Amaterasu flames were too dangerous to practice and too suspicious with the actual goddess Amaterasu so close to watch. Susanoo was out of the question, for now at least. His elemental manipulation proved to be one of Kurama's strong points. As a being formerly made of chakra, he had the highest affinity for all of the 5 elements used in ninjutsu. Kurama took this a step further and experimented in combining them into the Kekkei Genkei, the ninjin in the elemental nations coveted so much. So far, Kurama had a mastered grasp on Scorch Release, which proved equal to the Foxfire that Amaterasu was trying to train Yasaka to use, and Ice Release. The former was Kurama's favorite, finding a likeness to instantly burn his targets, and he was still trying to grasp on other elemental combinations. What Kurama wanted to continue was Senjutsu. He knew that mastering the art of taking in nature chakra like Naruto would unlock a whole plethora of abilities to help him. It was how Naruto had taken a quarter of his chakra when the pair fought for dominance in his mindscape. The art was too useful to pass up, and if not passed will block most of Kurama's much-needed abilities. He wanted to have his fox form back, goddammit. The very real problem was not that Kurama was a novice for Senjutsu. Born as a yokai and before that a literal mass of chakra, the use of Senjutsu was in his very being. The ticker is that the natural energy of Earth was dramatically different than that in the elemental nations, other than the fact one can still move while accessing Senjutsu. Natural energy in this world held a corrupting malice that threatened to lose his mind to his old primal rage. He didn't want to go back to that, but if he couldn't access Senjutsu, it will be impossible for him to access whatever was beyond his own current abilities. Kurama could feel there was something just on the other side of this threshold of his eyes. Something new yet familiar to his being, and it felt like his father and Naruto when he tried to nudge for that reaction in his body. Plus, failing at mastering Senjutsu in this world would be failing to freeing himself from his own wrath. The problem with the malice of the world was that it coaxed his own to come to the surface. He had to face that dark rage himself, and this time he didn't have Naruto to pull him out. By conquering his own deep-rooted hate, Kurama knew he would have lived up to his late friend, but if not, he had failed Naruto the worst way possible. Kurama was better than letting something as hatred rule him anymore. "Cocoon, lunch is ready," called a voice that made a melody pale in comparison. Kurama's fox ears perked up to the voice of his first and closest childhood friend Yasaka and the mention of food. He stood up from his meditation stance under the cherry blossom tree. This was one of his favorite spots for Kurama to isolate himself to focus on his Senjutsu training, and there was an almost divine tranquility in the garden of the blossoms that kept him mostly at peace. In turn, it helped keep down his own malice from being affected by that of the world. Not standing up, he had now a more discernible height difference for a kid at the age of 12 standing at 52, just on the cusp his teenage years. Under his kimono were defined muscles beyond what a regular kid his age should have thanks to his constant workout to get his body into gear to properly use his chakra. His figure was lean, but solid as rock if one were to touch him, and his face appeared more angular. The pair of crimson fox ears had gained a dark tint to them from his previous life, and his whisker marks became more darker. His red eyes looked ahead and he smiled at the golden beauty waiting for him with 2 bowls of noodles, waiting for Kurama to join her. Pretty didn't do enough justice of how marvelous Yasaka continued to become as the years went by. Yasaka had decided to wear her hair free of the bun to let its golden splendor wash down her hair. She was of average height for a 10-year-old kitsune yokai, yet her more sexual traits were showing. It's shocking really how she was already at a large C-cup in bust size at her age, indicated by the peak in her kimono at the top of her cleavage, and a mortal man will bleed to death imagining what she will be like in her prime years. She allowed her tails to wave freely behind her in a free dance much like Kurama's tails, and small golden fox ears twitched happily on the top of her head. By Kami, one of her best traits had to be Yasaka's smile that showed such sweetness yet holding a more alluring feel to them. Something in his chest was pounding as Kurama approached his best friend for her delicious cooking, but frankly he didn't care. Being free from his state as a biju allowed to feel how he genuinely enjoyed Yasaka's company by every second. His blood warmed wonderfully when his crimson eyes met Yasaka's golden orbs as he took his seat right in front of her with their meal sat between them. A light pink blush glowed on Yasaka's face as she continued to stare at Kurama, getting brighter when her eyes trailed to his right shoulder. The place where she marked him out of the blue as her potential mate. She should count her lucky stars that Kurama had no idea the significance of her sudden hickey 5 years ago, but it had been nagging at her mind every time of the day. When she would try to sleep, Yasaka felt there was something missing that made the nights awfully lonely, but if she did sleep, Yasaka tried to have her face burn bright at the blissful dreams with herself and Kurama sleeping together either under the cherry blossoms in the day or under the full starry night. Once, Yasaka had found herself sleepwalking to the other side of the palace where Kurama's room was. It never did help that Kurama was becoming such a dashing hunk of a kitsune yokai. His constant training kept his body in incredible shape with his developing muscles hidden under his kimono. She once saw Kurama out in the open fields practicing katas with Muramasa in nothing but white hakama pants, giving her a show of his whole upper body that made Yasaka drool. That day followed with very suggestive dreams in the night and leaving her unbearably hot. Still, it almost made Yasaka purr imagining what they will be like in the future if he keeps on his training. Itdakamasu. The kitsune pair called out before they dived into their meal. Kurama never lost the blissful sensation of tasting food, and Yasaka was by far the best in her culinary skills. He didn't care if he would get fat as long as it was worth it to taste Yasaka's cooking. Still, Kurama kept himself in a mannered pace taught to him by Amaterasu, and only agreed to the etiquette to not be as much of a slob as Naruto. So, Yasaka said suddenly, trying to stir up conversation, "Have you heard that Matabi has been named clan heiress of the Nekoshis?" Kurama snorted. "They're making a huge mistake putting the horny kitty as their clan leader. But you cannot deny that Matabi has proved herself in her strength and power." Yasaka countered, but inwardly was doing a victory jig that she and Kurama were on a similar page about the feline hussy that tried to steal her cocoon, even if the Nekosho was just teasing. For 5 years, Matabi and Shukaku kept in contact and occasionally visited Kurama. At first it was awkward small talk with a brawl with Shukaku trying to prove the number of tails didn't matter. Imagine Kurama's surprise finding the gap in their chakra not so far from their previous lives with his little brother having far more chakra than he did in the last life, and fought much like his former host Gaara. They at least had the sense to restrain from using their very destructive techniques. He did win in every brawl, but Amaterasu complained about the horrendous amount of sand in the palace and Yasaka had a wonderful time brushing the sand out of Kurama's tails. Son Goku visited rarely due to his home in the mountains in Asia where Sun Wukong had chosen to train him. It could not remain a secret when it pertained to the immense chakra of Kurama, Matabi, Shukaku, and even Son Goku that far surpassed anyone in history. They lit up like beacons in a horde of chakra-sensitive moths. Some in the yokai community were calling them the Shin Yokai, the Shinto version of the super devils of the underworld. Kurama idly chuckled at the thought thinking they were underestimating him and his siblings, but he had yet to meet one of these super devils to make a comparison. If one were to exist and so happen to threaten Yasaka like the devils many years ago, he will just introduce them to a Rasenrozu. Matabi had made herself a very surprising position among the Shinto pantheon besides being the heiress to the Hellcats. For the first time in over 1,000 years, there was a new priestess of the god of death, Shinigami. just as Yusaka was to be Amaterasu's priestess to manage the ley lines below Kyoto. Normally, Kurama would be worried for any type of association to a death god, but it was a pleasant thing to learn the actual Shinto death god wasn't that bad of a guy. Just very closed off. Who knows? Maybe Matabi can do the death god some good in his gloomy eternity. Kurama's ears twitched as his senses picked up the divinity that he identified to Amaterasu watching from the sidelines. The years here at the palace allowed to get a good opinion of the sun goddess, and he can safely say she was one of the better gods. If Kaguya was pale cold moon, Amaterasu was the complete opposite with a personality and warmth as great as the sun. The yokai followed her not out of fear, but respect to Amaterasu, who lived up to be the surrogate mother to all. That did not mean that Amaterasu wasn't as full of wrath as a god can be when her people are threatened. She had a lot of sway in her threats against the factions, being one of the most powerful in the world, but Kurama knew better that it wouldn't last long till someone stronger and less kind came here. There was another, however, beside Amaterasu that was worrying Kurama. It had just entered his sensory range without plausible warning. A strange violent taint was somehow mixed with this divine signature, but it was more potent than the darkness in a devil. What worried Kurama was that the divine being was suppressing itself, but the second it came to Kurama's senses when it first arrived, the former Biju was honestly scared at the level of power he felt was going to drown in mud. The only silver lining is that Kurama didn't sense any ill intent, but the fact he could sense barely anything at all wasn't calming him down. Something wrong, Kukun? Yusaka asked, snapping Kurama out of his daze. Kurama forced a smile for Yusaka. Nothing. Just wondering how you can make your wonderful cooking better by the year. His words worked like a charm as Yusaka's glowed with a smile as well as the scarlet coloring on her cheeks. Amaterasu, Shinto goddess of the sun and leader of the Shinto pantheon, was watching all of this with a contented smile on her face. It made her eternity all the more worth it seeing the people she ruled smile in happiness and enjoying life. She could not fathom how other gods in the world could be so selfish with the mortals. A good example would be Zeus and the multiple occasions he could not keep it in his pants towards his female worshippers. She could only count gods on one hand that were remotely caring toward the mortals, and even her own pantheon lacked the sort. Hello, Amaterasu, spoke the most deep, and in Amaterasu's opinion powerfully husky, voice of man from behind her. She did not make an eep, no, she certainly did not jump on the spot and nearly trip back trying to turn around to face her surprise. That was the floor's fault by the honesty of the sun goddess. Amaterasu was more than capable of picking herself back to her feet before falling to the floor, but strong hands held her up instead. A few seconds of Amaterasu blinking in confusion did the goddess realize she was laying on a pair of comfortably strong hands cushioning her back. She instantly stood up to her feet to regain some dignity to her apparent savior. All that degraded into a mess of jumbled words and thoughts when she saw the man towering over her. No, calling him a man was not a good way to describe him. He was in perfect a sense a god in his looks and divine signature. Rusty red eyes looked down on her from a height of 610 with a mane of white hair reaching his neck. There was nothing to cover his upper body, leaving Amaterasu to stare at the body most bodybuilders would worship to have, with pecs and abs looking as if carved from steel and biceps almost as big as her head. All of it was lined in these black tattoos that outlined every rippling muscle, making Amaterasu dry at the sight. His lower body was thankfully covered in black hakama with flame red patterns. The most surprising feature of the god were his forearms, where instead of skin had a chromium look to them. She knew this god perfectly well. His face appeared in her dreams, and it only got worse when she knew him. He was by far one of the most benevolent gods to the humans in the whole world besides herself. It was to the point this god was willing to fight against any supernatural entity for the sake of humanity, and he could probably well do it with how powerful this god actually was in the supernatural world. Some of him say that the god was in fact beast class, able to take on the likes of Trihexa and the evils of humanity spawned by the malice of the world. It was those traits of courage, selflessness, and strength that made up the one known as Asura, the Hindu demon god of wrath and justice and the strongest of the top 10. When she meant him being the strongest in the world, Amaterasu meant that he was so strong that the gap between himself and the Hindu god of destruction was immense. AAA as SSSS Su 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 RR Ra A Triple A. Amaterasu stuttered with a crimson flush growing on her pale cheeks whilst quivering on the spot. It was also worth mentioning that Amaterasu had possibly the biggest crush on the Hindu god. His kindness for mortals over his fellow gods led her to that constant fast thrum in her golden heart from a strong admiration. For all his incredible power and infamous wrath to obliterate a continent, Asura was enormously so kind. Just not so to other gods, considering his history of being banished from the heavens to Naraka, the Hindu version of hell. Amaterasu was a very rare exception. Her thoughts were a lot less calm in comparison to her already nervous outward appearance to her literal godly crush. WHWHWA. How have you been? Amaterasu squeaked, silently cursing herself for being a stuttering mess in front of Asura. I heard how tensions between you and the biblical factions are, and how worse they're getting, Asura said, his demeanor all seriousness. I figured you could use a friendly face. A small voice in a dark corner of Amaterasu's head was hollering to make it a more than friendly, with a few lewd comments on running her hands across that chiseled torso of perfect muscle. She instantly squashed down the distraction, happy with Asura's concern for her and the Shinto faction. Thank you, Asura-kun. Amaterasu replied meekly but with no less warmth than usual. That means a lot to me. I feel as only to get worse from here, Amaterasu, Asura said, standing at her side with his arms crossed. This Cold War is attracting a lot of unwanted attention from other factions, including the Norse and Greek. They haven't done anything to warrant caution, but the same can be said for vultures. Amaterasu smiled at the hidden insult towards the two pantheons in the west while also holding in a sneer of disgust. She wasn't sure about the Norse factions, but she'd bet her domain that the Greeks would possibly swoop in for political support. It wasn't lost on her for what that perverted mess that called themselves gods would want, and she'd sooner crash down a miniature sun than let them have her children. The yokai were not some sort of perverse playthings. I won't let them. Amaterasu growled lowly, even if it meant fighting against her the whole world to protect what she loved. I know you won't. Asura consoled with a noticeable ease in his voice. But if the worst does come, know that you have all of my help. You deserve it. Iya, he's so kind and sweet. A fangirl voice in Amaterasu's head hollered in joy before it was ruthlessly pushed down, but it was too late to bring another shade of red to Amaterasu's face. What's with your face all of a sudden? Asura wondered, noticing how strangely red Amaterasu's cheeks were. It's nothing. Amaterasu stuttered. Asura sighed. Geez, you've always are an awkward woman. The comment on her being awkward was an instant change on the sun goddess. Whatever color collected in her cheeks was flushed away to leave a deathly pale visage. She felt a rock had landed on the top of her head in that moment. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Amaterasu punished herself, knocking her knuckles on the side of her head. She only stopped when she remembered that Asura was standing right there witnessing the sun goddess making herself out to be a fool. In a blur of motion, Amaterasu faced the Hindu justice god as the proper leader of the Shinto pantheon. The only reaction gained from the towering, muscled god was a confused raised brow. Women are always so confusing, thought Asura, his eyes trailing over the lovely gardens of the palace. The royal palace of Kyoto was honestly one of the best parts of the world in his opinion. His home, while nice and at peace, still lingered with memories of his unjust banishment from the heavens of the Hindu pantheon. Betrayal beget rage, and thus he had ascended the infinite pillars of nirvana, a feat no being in existence had any right to possibly do, and came back to the world of the living as a changed man. He had his revenge on the traitors of the pantheon, who were about to wage a conquest of the world with an iron fist. And so it worked for Asura's wrath and the safety of the mortals to kill every one of the betrayers with his own hands. Eventually, the Hindu gods of the Buddhist era such as Indra, Surya, and Shiva took up the mantle of the pantheon, with the latter taking his previous place as the Hindu god of destruction and the getting second place in the top 10. That had been over 10,000 years ago, before the reign of the Sumerian pantheon and the rise of the strength in humanity. Ever since then, Asura had a very clear distaste for his other godly kind. He found them as the same selfish bastards that harass those that can't fend for themselves. Amaterasu was a very rare exception to that vision. The gardens of the palace mirrored her motherly devotions to the mortals with how neatly tended the flora were under her care. Just from that Amaterasu had Asura's greatest respect and soon friendship. But he can never figure out why she acted so weird around him. His eyes found the only other two occupants sitting under the porch over a meal. He instantly identified them as Kitsune yokai, but it surprised them that both had a full array of 9 tails. The female of the pair had fur that was sun-kissed and holding a radiance not unlike that of the sun. Asura remembered how Amaterasu talked very affectionately of her adopted daughter Yasaka and her next priestess to manage Kyoto's ley lines. But it was the crimson male Kitsune that garnered all of Asura's attention as apparent in the narrowing of his rusty red eyes. The crimson color of the tails and hair gave off a more oppressive aura. His senses as a god gleamed him the absolute monstrous reserves that no yokai in history before came close to. Give him a few years and the Kitsune will become one of the top 10 strongest in the world. However, Asura sensed something more than the power emanating from the Kitsune. He peered into the depths of the yokai's soul, and a frown marred his face at what lay before him. Under all that power deep in the heart and soul was beastly rage he knew all too well, and a malice more potent than the world itself. He knew that rage all too well, being its puppet long ago. It would not be wise to leave the boy unattended. Amaterasu, Asura spoke with all seriousness, pointing to the Kitsune pair. Who is that boy? Amaterasu answered. That is Kurama. I have let him live here in the palace since he was 4. He's a very troubled one. I suppose you are asking because of his massive chakra? Perhaps. Asura replied. There is a lot of hate in the boy. Much more than there should be for one his age. A sad smile appeared on Amaterasu's face. That would be the case. He had to watch his family killed in front of him, by devils no less. There was intense venom in Amaterasu's tone at the mention of devils, but Asura knew better than that. The sort of rage he can see in the Kitsune was beyond the hatred of a race. This was a vindictive sort, but he could not unfortunately rule out the source. He had to give credit to the kid at how well he was reining it in, and they were noticeable flickers of more positive emotions directed to Yasaka. Asura mused, glancing back to Amaterasu. Is he trained? Amaterasu nodded. I consider him a prodigy. The things he can do with chakra are nothing I have ever seen. Interesting. Asura said. One last question. In what direction are your private fields? Amaterasu blinked in confusion at the odd question. They're directly north and go one for about 10 kilometers. What are you going to do? Making my introductions. Asura answered vaguely, already making his way to the Kitsune pair. Kurama heard the approaching footsteps of the visitor, but made no move to acknowledge his presence and instead ready to move at any given moment. Yasaka's ears perked up to the heavy approach and her features showed recognition at the towering figure. Quickly cleaning her mouth of any stray morsels of the cooked meal, Yasaka stood up from her spot and made a deep bow before Asura. Ahaya, Asura-sama. Greeted Yasaka in a trained proper manner, a stark contrast to the bubbly way she greeted Amaterasu. Evidently, the one who was now towering over Kurama was someone that carried a large amount of respect or fame for Yasaka to act like this. Kurama chose to face the newcomer, but it was in that moment Asura did not deign to hide his divine presence anymore. As soon as Crimson Red met Rusty Red, Kurama did not have the strength to sit up. In that moment, with what he now knew to be a god standing before him, Kurama felt terror. His heart was hammering in his chest, but in the rare moments with Yasaka. This was a reaction from one who was so close to death in the hopelessness of it all. His acute sensory skills were flooded with there was no way to describe how massive the sheer volume and amount of energies that Kurama was exposed to. He felt his breathing becoming harder the more he stared into that endless abyss of power. It was power that not only exceeded his own, but also Hagoromo and Jubi. By Kami, this entity made Kaguya a literal bitch in comparison. What the fuck is he? Kurama screamed in his head. It has been a while, Yasaka. Asura greeted, but his eyes were solely on Kurama. So who might this be? Yasaka's voice served to break Kurama's petrified state and he rose to his feet. Yet Kurama was only in the body of taller than average 12-year-old and had to look up to meet Asura's face. The Hindu god did not break face at the yokai, and neither did Kurama, with the exception of a few beads of cold sweat. I hear you are a pretty tough kid, Kurama, Asura said. Is any of that praise true? Kurama's ego and pride would have gladly boasted he was capable of destroying mountains with ease with his chakra, But he had this sense to not piss this god off. This was not someone who would take such boasts well, and it would be better if Kurama was thought to be underestimated. It was the most logical choice to make out of this intact since his instincts screamed not to mess with Asura. Unfortunately, Yasaka wasn't going to lose the chance to praise her Cocoon. Cocoon's the strongest, praised Yasaka. He can everything blow up with his chakra and can move so fast. So don't underestimate Cocoon because he will be the greatest in the world. A chuckle left Asura's lips followed by an amused smile. Is that so? Then you don't mind if I see this power for myself? Asura was already too interested in this kid, both in his impressive power and the rage within him. Something like this simply could not be ignored. He idly thought of training the boy himself to master his own rage, but Asura still wasn't so sure. So Asura was going to do what he does best to come to the rightful conclusion as he has done for mostly everything in his eternal life. Press B, bam. He was just going to punch it and see what happens. The golden eyes of both Amaterasu and Yasaka bugged out and their jaws became unhinged as they watched Asura uppercut Kurama so hard the Kitsune yokai was rocketing off into the far distance. Amaterasu was in disbelief of the act despite knowing Asura's antics and Kurama's own impressive durability. Yasaka was more in shock and incredible fear for Kurama's health, for he was just punched by the god. Don't worry, Amaterasu, Asura assured, glancing back at the sun goddess. I won't hurt the kid too much. Just needed to get to some extra free space. Asura threw another god-level punch, this time impacting the ground while simultaneously lifting his feet into the air. The resulting force of the blow rocketed Asura into the air in the same direction he punched Kurama. The absurdity of the feat made Yasaka completely blank for a few seconds before coming to the crux of the situation. Kurama was being fought by a god and was possibly in great danger. Cocoon! Exclaimed Yasaka, making a beeline for the direction Kurama was punched out. Amaterasu had a strained expression on her face and could only hope that Asura wasn't going to blow this out of proportion. It would look good on her part if people wondered why Asura was unleashing his power on Shinto territory on a Kitsune boy no less. No, this was going on some certain extremes, but she couldn't stop it even if she tried. She could only trust in Asura's words to injure Kurama too much. With Kurama. Fucking shit. That MOTHERFUCKER, piece of shit. Those were some of the colorful words that a 12-year-old should not be saying as Kurama found himself endlessly skipping over grass and dirt like a pebble thrown over the surface of a lake. His humiliation finally ended when he crashed through several trees that stopped his velocity enough to allow Kurama to use his 9 tails and giant hands made of his dark crimson chakra to anchor him down. That still left Kurama in the worst spot he had ever been in. In just one blow he was sent off for several kilometers and already reduced to all fours with his breathing labored. His chin, being the impact of the blow, was rocked with pain still, even after Kurama's healing factor repaired the fractured jaw. A line of blood went down both corners of his lips and there was a black bruise where that godly power of a punch landed him. A crash not so unlike to a crack of a cannon went down right in front of him, kicking up dirt. A medium-sized crater of blown dirt lay before him, and out of the dust cloud walked out the same god that punched him all the way here. His expression was unchanged, as if this was a mere stroll through the park. At least you're conscious, Asura noted, leaving his arms at his sides. Show me what you got, Kurama. Kurama growled, not willing to back down even against this god. I am going